Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rob Sweeting along with Deborah Janolis. We'll rejoin CBS News coverage in just a moment after we bring you the latest information, what's going on here locally.
All schools in our area counties are remaining open. Some schools are canceling after-school activities. We suggest that you call your individual school for more information. Area military bases have sent non-essential personnel home. The bases are on heightened security, and JIA, like all airports in the country, are shutting down. They are on the highest alert.
Jacksonville Mayor John Delaney is in our city's Emergency Operations Center with our top city leaders. They're about to hold a news conference. As soon as we're able to go to that, we will. But first, let's join Brad Puffer. He's at Mayport, up in Mayport. Brad?
Well, just a few minutes ago here, the sign behind me changed to Condition Delta. We believe that's an increased level of security. Right now, there's been a steady stream of cars leaving the Mayport base here all morning long, and that's because those non-essential personnel were sent home. All of the civil service personnel, those who work for Raytheon, for Lockheed Martin, were all sent home today. Only those Navy authorized personnel are being allowed onto the base. Again, that increased security means that they are checking all the vehicles, making sure that they are authorized, checking their decals. They are doing spot checks of cars. They've set up concrete barriers in which the cars now have to maneuver around, and they are clearly a much higher level of security, much tense level of security here at Mayport. We believe that's the same condition that is going on at NAS Jacksonville and at perhaps all military bases across the country. We'll keep an eye on the situation here at Mayport. For now, I'm Brad Puffer.
And as we said, the city officials are gathered at the Emergency Operations Center in downtown Jacksonville preparing for a news conference, which we'll bring you, obviously, live when that occurs. We also wanted to share with you today, the Florida Times-Union has issued a special edition, as of course newspapers across the country are doing today, in response to this terror at home, the attack on America.
Now, we'll continue to bring you local updates on the half hour throughout the afternoon. And you can also log on to our web channel. That's news4jax.com for the latest information.
We'll return you now to CBS programming.
To try to get to safety. As soon as he found a telephone, he told me that he called his wife to tell her that he loved her. We have spoken to a number of firemen who have come out of there. You have to understand, Dan, the difficulty down there is it's impossible to see. I'm standing just a couple of blocks away. As you see on your live cameras, there's a huge towering cloud still above lower Manhattan. And down here on the ground, people are telling us that only a couple of blocks closer in, you can't even see your hand in front of your face. It's very, very difficult to work, to see, to breathe. One fireman stepped out of there and told us, the world is an evil place. I know that now. Dan?
Scott Pelley in Lower Manhattan. We've just passed the 1 o'clock hour in the east. A little more than 4 hours ago is when all of this started. 3 hijacked planes crashed into major U.S. landmarks this morning. They destroyed both of New York's 110-story tall towers, and they plunged into the Pentagon. This is the timeline. The South Tower of the World Trade Center was hit around 9 o'clock. Then the North Tower was hit. Air traffic in the U.S. was closed about 9:30. President Bush spoke from Florida. At that time, he's spoken since via videotape from Louisiana. Around 10 o'clock, a plane crashed at the helicopter pad at the Pentagon, did damage, set fire to portions of the Pentagon. There have been some casualties. Any dead, we don't know. There were some injured because we saw them at the Pentagon. Then the South Tower incredibly collapsed. Then the North Tower, the Twin Towers, the World Trade Center collapsed. And one pauses after you say that because, you know, it's almost unbelievable. And then there was a plane crash in Somerset County, Pennsylvania. That's in the Pittsburgh area. Now, a Pentagon spokesman, Glenn Flood, is just now quoted as saying, and I quote him directly, that there have been extensive casualties and an unknown number of fatalities at the Defense Department. That's the first time they've confirmed that they've been casualties. We go to CBS News Pentagon correspondent David Martin, our national security correspondent. David?
Dan, over my shoulder, you can see the fire engine still trying to put out the fire that began when the plane hit the building. If you were at a different location, you would be able to see that plane cut into that building just like an axe into a birthday cake. This is the west side of the building. People who were working on the east side of the building say they had their windows blown out and they saw a fireball. This for the largest office building in the world. So this plane caused extensive damage. Now, eyewitnesses have described a plane which the FBI decided was a description of a commercial 767 airliner or a 757, which would be consistent with the report of the airliner being hijacked, the American Airlines airliner being hijacked as it was taking off from Dulles bound for the West Coast. No confirmation that that is what happened. As to extensive casualties, certainly anybody that was on board that plane could not have survived that crash, and anybody who was in the direct path of that plane when it hit the building could not have survived. From a different perspective, you can see that floors 2, 3, 4, and 5 have all collapsed in on each other. It is a sight which I'm sure nobody in their wildest imagination thought they would ever see.
David Martin at the Pentagon, our national security correspondent. Jim Stewart, one of the best reporters in America when it comes to this kind of situation, has been working this story from the very beginning in Washington, and has new information about the early reports of a plane crashing at or near Camp David, the presidential retreat outside of Maryland. Jim?
Dan, the FBI now is trying to sort together what has actually happened here and what they still don't understand. And what they do know has happened is, of course, 3 separate terrorist attacks in the United States: the World Trade Center, at the Pentagon, and some event that has occurred in Pennsylvania, including that affected a commercial airliner. Because of the proximity of that crash of the commercial airline in Pennsylvania to Camp David, there is a presumption by some in law enforcement that Camp David may have been the target of that attack. That, of course, was a hijacked commercial aircraft that we are told did not respond to repeated attempts to communicate with it either by the military or the FAA. Now, other things that the government is confirming at this hour: number one, they received no warnings. They had no hint of any attack against domestic targets in the United States. Number two, they have not received any claim for any of these attacks from anyone. And number three, although they have no evidence that this is the case, they are assuming and presuming that there could be additional attacks within the United States and are reacting appropriately. To do so, they have set up command posts, we are told, in Washington, in Phoenix, and in Los Angeles. Moments ago, the Attorney General of the United States returned from out of town. He was taken by an armored car convoy to the FBI headquarters. Would you ask him, please? Excuse me, Dan, we have a little bit confusion here in our newsroom at the moment. I can also say that the intelligence community is now saying officially that they do believe that these attacks have the signature, as one official put it, of the Al-Qaeda organization. That, of course, is the terrorist organization that is under the control of Osama bin Laden. They said that is, quote, our lead theory. Dan?
Jim Stewart in Washington. Now at Barksdale Air Force Base in Shreveport, Louisiana, President Bush is about to come out. We believe this is live, although we've been told earlier that it'd be played on videotape. Here is the president. Well, folks, it's live television. In a situation like this, I know you understand that mistakes happen. To err is to human, but to really foul up requires a computer, and we've had some computer difficulty. We're going to once again try to bring you, and we now believe, I know this is confusing, but let's face it, it's a confusing situation, that the president flew from Florida, apparently to Barksdale Air Force Base outside Shreveport, Louisiana. We were told that he would appear, make a statement on videotape. Then we thought it was live. Now we're going to the videotape. We're having some difficulty, but here is the president, we hope, speaking on videotape from Barksdale Air Force Base in Shreveport. We're going to try again to show you the videotape of the president speaking here.
Freedom itself was attacked this morning by a faceless coward, and freedom will be defended. I want to reassure the American people that the full resources of the federal government are working to assist local authorities to save lives and to help the victims of these attacks. Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts. I've been in regular contact with the Vice President, Secretary of Defense, the National Security Team, and my cabinet. We have taken all appropriate security precautions to protect the American people. Our military at home and around the world is on high alert status, and we have taken the necessary security precautions to continue the functions of your government. We have been in touch with the leaders of Congress and with world leaders to assure them that we will do whatever is necessary to protect America and Americans. I ask the American people to join me in saying a thanks for all the folks who have been fighting hard to rescue our fellow citizens, and to join me in saying a prayer for the victims and their families. The resolve of our great nation is being tested, but make no mistake, we will show the world that we will pass this test. God bless.
President Bush on videotape from Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana. Where the president is at this moment, we do not know. The president said freedom itself was attacked by a faceless coward, and freedom will be defended. With us here at our CBS News World headquarters in New York is one of the world's outstanding experts on terrorism, Jerry Hauer, who's the former commissioner of the mayor's office here in New York City of emergency management. He's now a terrorist expert with Kroll Associates. Jerry Hauer, thanks for being with us.
Sure, Dan.
A lot of talk about rage and revenge. It's being said in Washington, this quote bears the signature of Osama bin Laden. What is the workaday American to think about what has happened in our country today?
Well, I think the first focus right now has to be on the victims and the families of this horrific event, and on the work of the rescue workers that both here and in Washington. Certainly our prayers go out to them. And we've seen just a devastating event today. At the same time, we have to recognize that this was a cowardly act. This was an attack on the United States. I'm sure that the good work of the FBI in time, they will track down. Certainly this has the signature of bin Laden, but I think it's premature to point fingers. I think that we need to let the FBI do their work and try and point the finger as time goes on. Right now, the focus has to be on the response here in New York and in Washington.
Well, let's talk about that. What is happening at the city, state, and federal level as we speak?
Well, clearly, as we've heard from the mayor, there's an enormous response. The New York City Fire Department and Police Department have mobilized every bit of manpower. They've recalled all firefighters, police officers back to work. There are hundreds and hundreds of police officers, firefighters, ambulances coming from around the state, from New Jersey. The governor has mobilized the National Guard to assist New York City, and there will be federal assets coming in, both from a law enforcement perspective to assist the New York office of the FBI, but more importantly to assist the response. FEMA urban search and rescue teams. A collapse of this magnitude with that is still burning, more than likely as a result of both the jet fuel and the gas that was in the building. I've been told that there's a gas leak in the building from the natural gas lines that feed the building. This could burn for quite some time, could burn for hours or even days. The recovery from this will take months and years.
A couple of questions. First of all, if we can get it up on videotape, I want to show you as well as viewers, because we're additional people coming in front of their set as the day goes along. If we can get the videotape up of 3 key events this morning, and the question is whether the collapse, this is, again, this is not a graphic, this is an actual picture of the plane coming into one of the World Trade Center towers, and then those flames shooting out the other side.
Right.
And then we'll follow on the videotape. This happened around 9 a.m. this morning.
Right.
And then not too long after that, in the 9 to 10 period, one of the towers began collapsing. We had hoped against hope it was partial collapsing. Some people leaped out of the building or were forced out by the flames and the explosion. They would gasp on the ground. My question is, we watch this first one tower collapse. That's what you're going to see on the videotape. Right. Then another tower collapse. Is this massive destruction, the World Trade Center, based on what you know, and I recognize we're dealing with so few facts, is it possible that just a plane crash could have collapsed these buildings, or would it have required the sort of prior positioning of other explosives in the building? What do you think?
No, my sense is that just the velocity of the plane and the fact that you have a plane filled with fuel hitting that building that burned, the velocity of the plane certainly had an impact on the structure itself. And then the fact that it burned and you had that intense heat probably weakened the structure as well. And I think it was simply the planes hitting the buildings and causing the collapse. You know, as you can see, the impact on the rescue workers. I mean, these people who are heroes in this building that have been impacted by this. The number of people that have been injured, the number of police and fire officers, firefighters that have been injured is just, it's incalculable at this point.
And the mayor said within the last hour, I think, that there were indications that some people might still be alive in the debris of the building. That's reasonable to accept that.
Oh, it's good. This early into an incident, you have to assume that some people are alive. I know that after all the years I've worked with the New York City Fire Department and Police Department, they will make every effort to do everything humanly possible to get in there to find any potential victims that might still be alive, recognizing that additional collapses of these buildings and the buildings, I'm told, in the area, there's a potential for a collapse of another building next door. They are going to do everything humanly possible to search that rubble.
Well, I'm recalling the terrible events when the federal building in Oklahoma City was, in effect, destroyed. It took days, and there were days, in fact, when people sniffing dogs, it's not an elegant phrase, were brought into play. Is that scene, it seems to me, is very likely to be played on a greater scale in the days to come.
A much greater scale. When you've got, it took days and weeks to get through the Mura building. You've now got 2 buildings that have literally been destroyed. The biggest problem in going through and doing any kind of search and rescue at this point is the potential for additional collapse.
We are interrupting our reporting from New York because in a moment we're going to go live to a news conference by Mayor Delaney and other city leaders, and we just want to say, like all of you, we too are all in shock.
And you can only imagine how Chief Ray Alfred, Sheriff Matt Glover, Mayor John Delaney can empathize with their counterparts in New York City, that their city is dealing with a travesty of this nature. We want to take you now to the Emergency Operations Center. Our reporter Jim Piggott is there, and as we said, the mayor, the fire chief, the sheriff, all of our city leadership is assembled to tell us what local reaction we need to know about what our response is going to be here locally. Jim?
20 seconds. 20 seconds.
Mayor Delaney is standing at the podium. As you see, there's Chief Ray Alford behind him, and we expect him to begin speaking in just a moment. We can see Jim Pickett, but unfortunately we can't hear him right now. As Dan Rather said, this is live television, and no story like this ever in our lifetime. As I say, we expect Mayor Delaney to begin speaking. He's waiting for all the TV and radio
appreciate
stations.
everybody coming today, and clearly this is a moment of national tragedy that probably is only rivaled by the Pearl Harbor bombing back in 1941. Our thoughts obviously are with the people in New York and Washington and Chicago, and of course we know they have families and friends all across the country, including probably a number in Jacksonville. Clearly the targets appear to be federal or national in scope. We just got off the phone with the Emergency Operations Center statewide in Tallahassee that essentially they've got about the same condition we are here in Jacksonville. There does not appear to be credible threats to those of us in Florida, but obviously we must proceed very, very cautiously over the next few hours and few days. We obviously want to show respect to what has gone on in those other 3 cities, but we believe our responsibility obviously as a community here is not to panic, to not give in to the terrorists. This is what they want us to do, and to try to preserve a degree of normalcy. With that, we'd like to go ahead and present what the state of the city is and what our plans are right now. We'll first call on the sheriff to give an update there. Sheriff?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First, let me just say the objective of the terrorists to disrupt government to the point where government will have to react and the citizens of the community will have to feel the reaction of government. And to some degree, there have been some success in that area. Although we've had no credible threats here in Jacksonville that we feel like is so legitimate that it causes us to go beyond what we call reasonable alert. When we look at the federal buildings here in Jacksonville, GSA and U.S. Marshals have certainly enhanced security, but the federal courthouse remains open. We in the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office have gone to somewhat of an alert that it requires us to be in a position to react in case we do have a situation. We are putting our substations on alert. We're making certain all of our police cars are gassed up, and we have some reserve police cars. In addition to, we put our SWAT team on alert. We've instructed our detectives that we wanted to see them in uniforms just to make certain that we present the numbers out there in case we have a situation, and we've enhanced building security over at PMB as well. We are x-raying packages that come in there just to make sure. We've had a number of bomb threats around the city, and of course we did have a suspicious package at the South Trust Bank at 1 Riverside Tower, and but that was a briefcase. That there was no legitimacy to that. It was not a bona fide incident, and we're thankful for that. So we are certainly maintaining a posture where we respect what has gone on around the country, but certainly we don't see any reason to be alarmed at this particular point.
That to go on to the next step to talk about the airport and the Red Cross numbers. Call up Fire Chief Ray Alford.
Spoken earlier. They said there's basically no critical threat here in Florida. We'll keep you up to date, but we're going to hear just a little bit more from the chief.
Area and also with what we need to do here. So with that, to Ray Alford.
Thank you, Mayor. Certainly, we're saddened by what has happened in New York and Washington. As for Jacksonville, our department is at a heightened state of awareness and alert, certainly. We have a metropolitan medical response system. Our team is the core of the fire department. We have about 104 members who are specially trained, and we are, in fact, on standby in the event that we have to go to New York or assist in any way, in any place. I have canceled all of our personnel leave. Anyone who has not been granted leave will not be granted leave. The Red Cross has notified us that they have established a family well-being call center That number is 358-8091. For anyone who has relatives in New York and are concerned about their well-being, they can call that number again, 358-8091. We've talked to JIA. They have informed us that there were still about 300 to 400 people in the airport. It's going to take them about an hour and a half to completely get everybody out of there and eventually shut the airport down. They have scheduled chartered buses to take people to their destination, and that is happening at this point. The EOC is at level 1. Chip Patterson is here and will be here. His staff will be monitoring our situation upstairs on the 4th floor in the Emergency Operations Center. For anyone that's interested and wants some information from us in that regards, 630-2472. Certainly they can call us. We can update them on where we are. Thank you.
Also like to add on the airport, just before we came down, the word we have received that we've twice confirmed now is that every airplane that left Jacksonville this morning has safely landed. So for those that had family members that were on a flight leaving in Jacksonville or were concerned, every one of those planes has safely landed. Tonight is a scheduled city council meeting, and we'd now like to ask City Council President Matt Carlucci to report on what his intention is now. Matt?
Thank you, Mayor. We do have scheduled a regular city council meeting tonight. We're in the process of trying to make an appropriate decision about that and using all sensitivity in that process. We will be meeting in conference room A sometime between 2 and 3 o'clock this afternoon to make our announcement with regards to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. To recap, basically the federal buildings are remaining open in Jacksonville, as is the federal courthouse. The South Trust building that had a concern with a bomb turned out to not be legitimate. The airport is now beginning to charter buses to take people to their destinations. All planes are safe out of Jacksonville. The Red Cross has a phone number established for those that are obviously inquiring about family members up in the other 3 cities or on the airlines. As to city buildings, we have made the decision not to shut any city buildings down. Similarly with the county courthouse, it will remain open. The schools, we've had discussions with John Fryer that I have this morning, and then also just confirmed before coming down. The plans for the school system are to remain open. Parents can pick their children up if they have a concern pursuant to normal procedures to go and check your child out of school. School buses will be able to get into the Navy bases, so children will be able to get home, and the intent as of about 1:30 is to have our school system and all public operations still as normal tomorrow. As to the Navy, spoke with Admiral Gaudio. Obviously, Admiral Gaudio reiterates that there does not appear to be, from their information, a reason to be concerned civically, although the Navy has obviously extremely tightened up security on those bases. Non-essential personnel have been requested and directed to leave, and obviously the security is at a very significant level on that particular base. I will state, though, that as I guess one would expect from the Navy, that they're used to these kinds of things, and they were calm. The tone was calm as it came from there. At approximately 12:50, we did receive a bomb threat at City Hall. I think it is fair to say that under normal circumstances, the wording of this threat we would have ignored, but for the fact of the events of today. So approximately 9 minutes later, about 1 o'clock, we did ask the people in City Hall to, much like a fire drill, to go outside for approximately an hour. The sheriff's personnel are now going through the building, and we anticipate going back into the building at 2 o'clock. As the sheriff pointed out to me upstairs, you don't even really want to acknowledge these because it encourages more. Today is unique. Over the next few days, we do not anticipate that kind of a response unless we do receive heightened suspicious activity. I think the sense is that today is the day when the attacks will be. Obviously, the terrorists would expect tremendously increased security immediately after the knowledge of this happens. So the best instinct is the worst is over. However, we know that we've got to keep our eyes open and be vigilant. So at all of our public buildings, all of the federal facilities, security is up. And the report from Tallahassee is that they're obviously in a little different situation with all the state capitol buildings over there. The blood banks, many people are asking what they can do. Obviously, in this sort of scenario, it frankly is the kind of things that tend to bring the country together, and we first turn to prayer on that, and obviously we're going to hear a lot about that in the next few days. The blood banks would probably be something more directly that some people could do to really feel that they're stepping out, and the blood banks have informed us they'll remain open until 9 o'clock tonight. There's obviously going to be an awful lot of need for that in the other 3 cities. And with that, if you have any questions, we'll go ahead and toss it out to you. Yeah, Charlene?
First Coast News. Some of our reporters in the field are finding that some of the gas stations are already increasing their gas prices. Can you respond to that? The sheriff already said that obviously his fleet has gone to gas up, so obviously a lot of folks in the community may be doing the same thing with their cars.
Yeah, there is a state law basically on price gouging when you have an emergency. That is the first we've heard from that. That is something that we are allowed to take action on legally. The state attorney, I think as you recall, during the hurricane 2 years ago, Harry Shorstein was over, said they will take a look at that personally, and obviously that's something that's very easy to prove after the fact, and we'll take a look at that.
Some buildings like the Modus building, high-rise buildings in downtown have been evacuated, or workers have been allowed to leave. Is the city basically doing it as a business-by-business basis, or have you suggested any recommendations to them in terms of clearing out the buildings?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that the fire chief and the sheriff and I and the council president, I think, confirmed that we are not ordering the evacuation of buildings. That's obviously left up to the people in the buildings. It is understandable on a day like today that if you're in a high-rise and you see those images on TV, I think that the fear and the balance you want is you really don't want to give in to the terrorists. That's what they want. They want this panic. They want government shut down. They want public buildings and public business shut down. And that's why what we're waiting for is a credible threat or a credible concern. And we're not getting any indications of that in the Jacksonville area and in the Florida area.
How confident can you be that if something would happen here, that the response would be adequate?
Well, that's what we prepare for. I will say that 2 of the things that the sheriff and the fire chief brought was some heightened training for terrorist activity, and I think the phrase is weapons of mass destruction. So the departments have been training in that area. The problem is some of that stuff's after the fact, and obviously if you have an airplane on a suicide mission, there's not a heck of a lot you're going to be able to do.
Being a coastal city, being a military town, are we considered a possible target? Pittsburgh.
Yeah. I think obviously they were looking to try to get to some of the major northeastern cities where they can get to some of those to Washington, New York, and the military sites obviously would be the larger concern because we have a big military presence here. Again, I'll repeat what Admiral Gaudio said, that they similarly do not have credible evidence that we are a site or a target. That doesn't mean that everybody can ignore it, and that's not what we're doing. Obviously, we have to be heightened, but people should not panic. Be concerned and be focused, but don't panic.
Has the city received any instruction from the federal government or authorities about what to do, how to go about it?
No, Chip or Chief, can you comment on that? Chip's got us shaking his head now.
No, we have not. Let me go back to your question about awareness of training. As you know, Jacksonville several years ago was identified as one of 27 cities across the country to receive special terrorism training. So to the extent that we've received all that training, all of our folks in the fire department are prepared. The sheriff's personnel has been trained as well. The federal government has spent about $1 million for $100 million over the last year just specifically for this kind of training.
What are the odds that we will be going, Chief? Already you mentioned that you have special trained personnel. I covered the Oklahoma City bombing while working in Tulsa, and shortly thereafter they were mobilized to go. Obviously, a lot of emergency personnel, we've been hearing initial reports, have been injured in New York. What are the odds that our folks will be going up there?
Well, we don't know. We're going to wait on FEMA, obviously, and the Department of Defense. If, in fact, our folks are needed, as I said earlier, we have about 104 of our personnel who are specially trained. The city has a Metropolitan Medical Strike or Response Team, which is made up of law enforcement, fire and rescue, hospitals, health services. So that make up our medical response team.
So we are on standby.
Well, nobody has said anything, but certainly as a part of, as a commitment to being trained, we have to be willing to respond if we asked to do so.
Typically, they'll get that word out. Basically, they're sort of going, Dave, back to your question. The state typically handles the emergency preparations. Chip, obviously, Chip Patterson is who's been in contact with them. They have phone conferences statewide. We listened in for a good portion of that. Basically, the same decisions are being made statewide as to public buildings, schools, the occasional bomb threat, none of which have appeared credible so far. And then, obviously, the federal activity. This is a unique one. This is obviously it's an effective declaration of war on the United States, and we'll get some requests for help and directions from the federal government over the course of probably the rest of the day and tomorrow.
Mayor, you were with the president yesterday. You were on Air Force One, as I understand. In retrospect, knowing that this obviously wasn't a plan that had taken some time, any thoughts that you have about being with the president, knowing that the Pentagon had been targeted in your mind?
Yeah, I guess I would say this, that the country's in good hands. I was able to spend about 4 hours with the president and the governor, and the very in-touch individual could talk about a wide range of topics with a phenomenal amount of authority, and the country's in good hands. I think we're going to be steered correctly over the course of the next few days.
It was mentioned that there were bomb threats. I mean, are we seeing a lot like the one at City Hall, or?
You had the one at the South Trust building that was a briefcase that was left. It was not a bomb. And then we had a phone call today. City Hall said you've got 30 minutes to evacuate the building, and hung up. It would typically be the kind of call that you would ignore. But today's a little different. Yeah, Sheriff, you want to comment?
Yeah, and we did have one other bomb threat that we know of that we are dealing with. We're not making a big deal out of those because we certainly don't want to encourage it. But I tell you, the citizens of this community have been very calm about all of this. We are not holding many calls in the communication center here. I think we're holding about 10 calls now, which is kind of a typical day. So we certainly don't want to send a message that there's a need to panic here, because it's certainly not.
What are the plans for the next 24 hours? Is the operations center just prepared to continue working for the next day or two at the current level? Or?
Yeah, they've raised it to this particular level. Our plan is to meet again at 5 o'clock. We convene representatives from the JEA, Walt Bucells is here, the Navy, the school board, all entities that may have to act in the event of an emergency. Typically in Jacksonville, that's the threat of a hurricane. We plan on meeting at 5 o'clock, and if there's a need for further public statement after that, obviously we'll let you know. We'll come on down. In the meantime, clearly, if there's things that come up of more imminence, Chip and Sharon and the other people are here. We want to try to make sure if people have questions, to the extent we can provide an answer or response, that we're available to do it. But I would anticipate that sometime later this afternoon, somewhere between 5 and 6, that maybe we'd be down and give you another update. But I have a feeling we've probably captured it right now.
Is there any guideline or plan for how?
So that is the situation here at the Emergency Operations Center. We heard from the mayor, we heard from the fire chief, we heard from the city council president. Basically, they said there is not a considered threat to the Jacksonville area. Of course, we'll keep you posted on the latest. Live from the Emergency Operations Center, I'm Jim Pickett.
The mayor also said that in talking with state leaders, there have also been no credible threats statewide, and we will be hearing from Governor Bush at 3 o'clock. We'll bring that news conference to you live.
The other thing that is supposed to happen at 3 o'clock is that Jacksonville Airport will be totally shut down. There are about 300 or 400 people at last count still at the airport. Let us go live now to Channel 4's Jennifer Waugh. Jen?
Tom, about an hour and a half ago, the order was given to shut down the airport, and frankly, that 300 or so have already been worked out, have been moved out, so that really the media is all that is left here. You can see that behind me there are no lines. Even the counters themselves are closed down. Right now, important personnel here at the airport are meeting. They're discussing security. You see that K-9 units have been throughout the airport, the area where passengers were checking for any possible problems. Right now, as I mentioned, important people are in the meeting. FAA, folks here at the airport, they're talking about what will happen now, specifically how to search all of those 30 planes that are now on the ground here at JIA. 25 of those planes were diverted here. Another 5 were grounded at around 9:30 when the order was given. And now it's the task of going through each and every one of those planes, cargo included, and searching that just to make sure. Again, the reason that the airport was closed down was precautionary reasons only. As you saw there earlier, a number of people who were stranded on those 25 flights that were diverted here were shipped out. Most of them went, either they rented cars or they were bussed out to nearby hotels or areas within the state where was their final destination. We have no idea how long the airport will remain closed. Of course, airport personnel are urging anyone that had any flights earlier today, later today, or even this evening to please stay away. The airport is closed indefinitely. We'll continue to follow the situation here. For now, we're live from Jacksonville International Airport. I'm Jennifer Wall.
One important announcement from Mayor Delaney. He said the airlines have verified that all of the flights that left Jacksonville this morning have landed safely.
And we will see you again at 2 o'clock with another local update. We return you now to CBS News coverage.
For we're told points unknown. Now, to bring you up to date quickly on what's happened, particularly for those of you who may be joining us late or just tuning in, plane crashed into one of the World Trade Center towers in Lower Manhattan shortly before 9 a.m. this morning. Second plane crashed into the second tower of the World Trade Center shortly after 9 a.m. President Bush was in Sarasota, Florida, called the crashes at that time an apparent terrorist attack and a, quote, national tragedy. Then an aircraft of some kind crashed into a helicopter pad at the Pentagon, damage, including some fatalities there. The Pentagon, of course, just outside Washington, D.C. in Northern Virginia. That was about an hour after the first planes, plural, crashed into the first towers here in New York. The Federal Aviation Administration shut down all aircraft takeoffs nationwide. One World Trade Center tower then collapsed shortly after 10 a.m., about an hour after being hit by the plane. American Airlines said one of its planes that crashed into the World Trade Center was American Airlines Flight 11, hijacked from after takeoff from Boston en route to Los Angeles. Senior law enforcement officials said a car bomb exploded outside the State Department. Then later, senior federal officials said, well, no, that they might have been wrong about that. There was a report of a plane crash in the area of Camp David, the presidential retreat in rural Maryland. The facts on that have never been quite squared. And then there was what was described as a big plane crash, a strange one, near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. All those have been the events of this day so far. No one doubts that the casualties are extremely high in the collapse of the World Trade Center buildings. You just heard live on the telephone, Mayor Giuliani did not even want to speculate how many, but when the thousands were mentioned, he just said he didn't want to contemplate that the loss of life has to be high. How high, no one knows, in the crash of these World Trade Center buildings. So that's the situation at this hour. We have with us in our CBS News World News headquarters in New York, R.P. Eddy, former official of the National Security Council. Thanks for being with us. What government, quote, continuity issues went into effect today? I'm puzzled, I think a lot of people are, about what's happened with the president. Put this in some context. Give us some perspective, Mr. Eddy.
Well, the U.S. government has a plan called continuity of government that has been in place since the beginning of the Cold War to protect the constitutionally mandated succession of the executive. And when an event of this magnitude or this sort of threat appears, those programs go into effect and take the different principles that would potentially be in line of succession and put them in secure locations. So there's proximity issues and there's also protection issues. The president would, as he has here, quickly move to Air Force One, which is a mobile command center that allows him a certain amount of protection and mobility, and other officials are moved to other secure locations throughout the country.
Why would the president not want to go directly to the White House and be seen in the center of the executive branch of government and in command there? Why not go directly back to the White House?
Well, the White House is the symbol of U.S. government, and it's the home of the U.S. president, but it's also not the most secure location that one can imagine. Living in a democracy like we do, we expose ourselves to certain vulnerabilities, and we don't have our executive housed in armored cars. So the White House isn't an armored vessel. So the most secure location for him and the place he needs to be is wherever he's safe, and that doesn't tend to be the White House in a situation like this.
Was or was not the top levels of the government, were they not concerned today about a possible chemical or biological attack?
Well, I think when you have an event like this occurring, you have to recognize the psychology of the terrorists, if in fact it is a terrorist attack, and I can't imagine it's anything else. It would be the same psychology that would drive them to do a chemical and biological attack. So if they were to undertake this kind of event, then you could suppose they would also be willing to do a chemical and biological attack. Although it should be noted that this kind of attack is much easier to pull off than an effective chemical and biological attack. This isn't a highly sophisticated terrorist attack. A chemical and biological attack takes a lot more planning and preparation.
On the basis of your experience in government as a former official with the National Security Council, would this kind of attack require some kind of state support for this act of terrorism?
I wouldn't want to make a guess on that question if it did or didn't actually have state sponsorship, but I don't think so. The reality is that a lot of the groups that would pull something like this would be ones that do have state sponsorship, and we know that. And I would bet dollars to donuts that we're going to find that whoever did do this did have state sponsorship of one degree or another.
R.P. Eddy, if you could stick with us here for a minute, we want to go to Elizabeth Caledon, one of our CBS News correspondents who's at Bellevue Hospital, one of the world's best-known hospitals here in New York. Elizabeth?
I'm standing by outside two of New York City hospitals, NYU Medical Center and Bellevue Hospital just down the street. The only way to describe it here is it's a scene of, I would say, organized chaos. There are hundreds of people lining up to give blood. Blood is going to be a big need in this situation. And also doctors rushing into work and family members looking for their loved ones. Now, Bellevue is one of the biggest trauma centers in New York City, so the majority of the most seriously injured patients will be taken here. The deputy director of emergency services here at Bellevue did tell me they have quadrupled the size of the emergency room. They have hundreds of doctors coming in from their days off, getting here any way they can to help with the situation. The way it's working is there is an emergency medical services team down at the site of the World Trade Towers. They are doing triage, determining which patients are the most severely injured and should be sent on to the hospital. And the doctors say so far they have no idea how many injured there will be. They are expecting thousands. They are prepared for thousands. They've gone through drills preparing them for this day many times, they say, and are also trying to cope with the psychological trauma of this situation. I'm Elizabeth Caledon, CBS News, reporting from NYU Medical Center and Bellevue Hospital.
This was videotape of Ms. Caledon made a very short while ago. Now, the mayor of Washington, D.C. has declared a state of emergency there. According to the FAA, all U.S. commercial flights now have been accounted for, keeping in mind that the airlines have confirmed that at least 4 aircraft, commercial airplanes, were hijacked earlier in the day. American Airlines says that 2 of theirs, 1 each, hit the World Trade Center tower. So American Airlines says it was their hijacked planes, hijacked aircraft. What an incredible story this is. Hijacked planes crashed into the World Trade Center. Now, David Martin reports from the Pentagon. Remember, the Pentagon, an aircraft of some sort was crashed into a helipad. It caused damage and some fatalities and injured the Pentagon. David Martin now reports the aircraft carriers USS George Washington and John F. Kennedy have been deployed to New York with the amphibious ships, cruisers, and destroyers that are part of their normal battle groups. Keep in mind that aircraft carriers do not sail alone. Of course, they have very large battle groups with them, and that the battle groups centered around the George Washington and John F. Kennedy have now been deployed toward New York City. Some of those ships also coming up the Chesapeake Bay to Washington. That is, that some of the battle carrier groups from these 2 battle carrier groups apparently going to be sent up Chesapeake Bay to Washington. The ships will provide hospital beds, humanitarian assistance, and of course defense for those 2 cities. Both the Washington and the Kennedy are out of Norfolk, Virginia. Now, R.P. Eddy, formerly of the National Security Council staff, I know that there's a scenario that a state enemy of the United States might want to have an attack at or about the same time that some terrorist attack. What would the U.S. military as a whole be doing today under the plan?
Well, as soon as this attack was reported, a coordinating subgroup of the White House was immediately called to effect, and all the cabinet officials that were involved with that met via secure teleconference to discuss the intelligence about the attack and the preparations to deal with further attacks and to deal with the catastrophic effects of this. And then the final thing they would probably discuss is if they could establish culpability and what kind of response would be necessary if they are able to figure out, who is behind this, if it's a state sponsor or not. And that usually takes a little while, though.
And our State Department, which has been responsible for trying to pressure the Taliban government of Afghanistan to give up Osama bin Laden unsuccessfully so far, where would they be in all of this at the moment?
Well, the State Department will be responsible for all international diplomacy that we do vis-a-vis this attack, including talking to the Taliban, which we do through certain channels, actually here in New York, to explain to them that, and we have previously, that we hold them responsible for any attack that occurs against U.S. citizens by the Taliban, by the Osama bin Laden. So that message has gone out again. I'm sure that we've insisted that they give us any cooperation that they might be able to, and we've asked that of our allies and other countries around the world. Part of that will be intelligence sharing, and part of that would be deploying of resources.
Arpietti, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
James Kelson, who was formerly head of the New York City FBI office and was the assistant director of the FBI, and is on the, not just on the telephone, he's with us now, former director of the FBI office in New York. Jim, it's good to see you again. Put this in context and perspective for us, and let our viewers and listeners know you were in charge of the investigation of the TWA 100 crash investigation, have a lot of experience with this kind of thing. Give us some context.
Dan, it's a huge event. It's a black day. In my view, it's a bigger event than Pearl Harbor. It's war. It's declared war, and we need to now pull together as a nation and accomplish a bunch of things.
Well, nearly everybody's been talking today about the FBI's role, and obviously the FBI has a large role, but the FBI alone cannot possibly investigate something such as this. What other agencies, what other resources the U.S. government be pulled in to find out who's responsible for this?
Well, all the intelligence agencies, the CIA, NSA, law enforcement at every level, work together on a daily basis as a team now. The idea, though, that we can know everything, and obviously we didn't know everything. When I say we, I'm talking about that team that I used to be a part of. This event happened, so we did not stop it from happening. It's terribly difficult in a free society with open borders, and on any given day, people land at Kennedy Airport and other gateways undocumented. It's very difficult, and particularly with Middle East terrorism, these cells are not joined together. The only thing that joins them together is their hatred for us, our way of life, our foreign policy.
Jim Kelson, you say that these various terrorist organizations are not necessarily as well connected as we sometimes might imagine them to be. Give us some perspective on who among the world's states helps them with what they do. I'm not suggesting that we know anything about who did this today, but the questions just tumble out. Well, can someone do this without some state support from someone like Iraq or Iran?
Well, Dan, whether or not this is state-supported, there has been state support over the years, and if this was 1% or 10% or 100% state-supported, I don't know. I'm a civilian now. I'm sure that the FBI and the agency and all the other intelligence apparatus of the free world, for that matter, is trying to figure out exactly who's behind this, and we need to act with massive power, in my view, without a lot of collateral damage, and that's difficult to do. But this is an act of war, and we need to act accordingly. Now is the time to step up to the plate and do the things that we need to do here as a country.
Jim Kelson, when you were still active with the FBI, true or untrue, that there were a number of terrorist acts in which the threads of evidence led back to certain states, but that for reasons, perhaps understandable reasons of diplomacy and what we call geopolitics, there was a tendency to say, well, we may know that, but we don't want to deal with it. True or untrue?
No, I think that's true, Dan. I think that obviously there has to be balance in actions that we take. These events look very clear once they happen. Now that this horrific act has happened, and then we have untold dead people in New York and Washington and some airplane in Pittsburgh. It's crystal clear that we need massive, effective, high morale law enforcement intelligence. We need to act as a unified country. We need to stop the hypocrisy. Not that hypocrisy got us to this day. I'm not saying it did. But this is serious business. And those of us in law enforcement over the years, and intelligence work over the years, didn't know what day this would happen, hoped it would never happen, but thought surely someday it might happen. I mean, we saw the World Trade Center bombing. We saw in the United States. Then we saw events, the Blind Sheikh going to blow up the Holland Tunnel, the Lincoln Tunnel, the United Nations building, the FBI building. We saw Ramzi Youssef plot in the Philippines, well, after he escaped the United States, to blow up 9 or 10 jumbo jets simultaneously. We saw the bombing of the coal. We saw the bombing of the barracks in Saudi Arabia. We saw the bombing of our embassies in Africa. There's plenty of evidence that people hate us for who we are, what our foreign policy is. And we need to act. And we need to act together as a country.
James Kallstrom, formerly head of the FBI office in New York and a man who helped run the FBI for a long while. Thanks for being with us this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Dan.
Rulers of the Taliban have rejected all suggestions that Osama bin Laden could be behind these attacks. We mentioned earlier that some leaders of the Taliban got out early to disassociate themselves from this whole thing. And the background of this is that by last reports, Osama bin Laden was in Afghanistan. There's been some pressure to get him out of there. The Taliban is responding today. The Taliban condemned the attacks, and they said that bin Laden had nothing to do with it. Tony Blair, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, is speaking. We go to him live.
The utter carnage and terror which has engulfed so many innocent people. We've offered President Bush and the American people our solidarity, our profound sympathy, and our prayers. But it is plain that citizens of many countries around the world, including Britain, will have been caught up in this terror. I have just chaired an emergency meeting of the British Government's Civil Contingencies Committee, and I would like to explain some of the measures that we have agreed to take here. There are a range of precautionary measures. We have stepped up security at airports to the highest levels. No flights will take off from the United Kingdom for which we cannot apply the highest standards of security for aircrew and passengers. Private flights have been stopped except where specifically authorized. Flight paths into London have been changed so there will be no civil overflights of central London. Security has been increased across the full range of government buildings and military premises. The police across the whole of the UK are on full alert. All our defence facilities around the world have been moved to high alert to ensure the protection of British service personnel. Advice has been given to major financial and business institutions about appropriate security measures. A number of other security measures have been taken, and of course we are in close touch with US, European and other allies and are cooperating with them on issues of security. All relevant ministers remain in communication, and the committee, the Civil Contingencies Committee, will meet again tomorrow at 8 a.m. Obviously, some of these measures, not least the effect upon airports, will lead to some disruption, and I hope people understand that. But other than the specific measures we have taken, or that we have advised others to take, business and everyday life can continue as normal. As for those that carried out these attacks, there are no adequate words of condemnation. Their barbarism will stand as their shame for all eternity. As I said earlier, this mass terrorism is the new evil in our world. The people who perpetrate it have no regard whatever for the sanctity or value of human life. And we, the democracies of the world, must come together to defeat it and eradicate it. This is not a battle between the United States of America and terrorism, but between the free and democratic world and terrorism. We therefore here in Britain stand shoulder to shoulder with our American friends in this hour of tragedy, and we, like them, will not rest until this evil is driven from our world.
Live from Great Britain, Tony Blair, the British Prime Minister, with his response and comments on what had happened today in one of the most horrifying attacks ever on U.S. soil. Terrorists.
And we are joining you again to give you the latest in local information in reaction to this attack on America. We have heard from Brad Puffer, who's been out at Mayport Navy Base all morning, and we have now confirmed, at least through CBS News reports, that the USS Kennedy, based at Mayport, is on its way to New York to offer assistance and also protection for that city.
As soon as word of the attacks was received, all of the military personnel in Jacksonville began reacting immediately, as they have been trained to do. We're going to go live now to Channel 4 reporter Stacey Spanos, who is at NAS Jacksonville. Stacey?
Tom and Deborah, when we got here earlier today at NAS Jacksonville, there was literally a mass exodus. All the military bases here in Jacksonville and quite possibly across the country released all their non-essential military personnel. As you can see, they have set up roadblocks here and traffic is backed up. The Naval Depot, we have learned today at NAS Jacksonville, has closed. All routine scheduled appointments at the Naval Hospital have been canceled through Friday. That is what we are hearing. Since we have been here, security has gone from Charlie, the second highest level of security, to Delta, the highest level of security, and we are told that is the level of security that all bases maintain during wartime. As you can see behind me, since we have been on Delta, they have set concrete roadblocks up. They are carefully scrutinizing ID of all cars going in, and they are only allowing essential personnel onto the base. The mood out here is one of shock, one of disbelief, and understandably one of anger. We have heard all sorts of comments out here today, but one image that will stick in my mind is a young sailor. I was standing next to him, he was sitting down, and as I passed, his eyes, he just looked up at me. You could tell he had been crying, but there was also this burning look in his eyes, like he was ready to defend his country. All the commotion that's going out here now has been, there's one thing that has been forgotten, and as you can see, that is the American flag. It has yet not gone to half-mast, one of the tragic and terrible duties that will have to be done before the day is out. That is the latest that we know from NAS Jacksonville. We don't know if any sailors or any planes have been deployed from here, but we will bring you the latest as we know it. We're live at NAS Jax. I'm Stacey Spanos.
As we heard from Mayor Delaney about 45 minutes ago, there is no citywide evacuation that has been ordered. All the federal buildings are still open, despite reports to the contrary earlier. The federal courthouse is open. Nevertheless, if you're out on the roads in Jacksonville, you get a sense that an awful lot of people are leaving work and are going home on their own because they just want to be at home at a time like this.
To hug the people they love. And, of course, our prayers are with all those families in New York and the Washington area.
One important note about the military bases we also got from Mayor Delaney, for the parents of school children there, of course, even though they're on a heightened state of alert at the military bases, the school buses are going to be allowed in. The Duval County school system is trying to maintain, excuse us, business as usual. Schools are not canceled, but those buses will be allowed to get into the military base to bring those children home.
There really hasn't been any reason to believe that we are in any danger in our area. The mayor held a news conference to assure us of that, along with the fire chief and the sheriff. And the governor is expected to hold a news conference at 3 o'clock to confirm that is the case statewide, even though the state capitol has been closed, FSU has been closed as a precaution in a time like this. But no credible evidence that anyone at the state or local level knows of that we should be concerned here in Florida about our own personal safety.
Many of the local churches have been calling us, asking us to announce special services that they're holding tonight. Frankly, we've had an avalanche of these calls, and we just don't have the opportunity to put all of the churches' announcements on the air on the bottom of the screen. But we can almost bet if you call your church now or a little later in the afternoon, you'll be informed of any special services that are being held at your church, and we urge you to do that.
I think Stacey mentioned that one of the sailors out at NAS had a fire in his eyes, and Bob Schieffer, reporting from Washington outside the Pentagon, said he felt a sense of a quiet rage. I think that describes probably how all of us feel at this point.
Certainly is. We're going to go back now to Dan Rather in New York, and we'll be back to see you just as soon as we have some new information to bring you.
They have no evidence that there was any kind of a crash or an explosion or fire or anything near Camp David in the Catoctin Mountains of Maryland. They say that there was this aircraft that went down in the Pittsburgh area, which is still some distance from Camp David, but there was nothing, at least, probably I would think within a number of miles radius of Camp David, and nothing to suggest that Camp David may have been specifically targeted either. However, they do not know at this point where that aircraft that crashed in Pittsburgh was headed, whether it was indeed headed to Pittsburgh, whether it might have been trying to overfly the northern area of Maryland near Camp David. Perhaps it might have been headed for downtown Washington, D.C. as well, because there, of course, is that other aircraft that crashed into the Pentagon. And there appeared to be, at least from my perspective, Dan, upon arrival at the White House this morning, that when that aircraft went into the Pentagon, what had been a fairly mild state of alarm at the White House suddenly went to an enormously high state of alert. They evacuated the building within 5 minutes, and they cordoned off a number of blocks around the White House, not letting anyone back in. And as well, they evacuated the vice president and his staff. He is in charge of the Situation Room right now, off campus, not at the White House, though by all accounts still in Washington, D.C. He is there with his national security advisor and his chief of staff at his side. Lynn Cheney, his wife, also said to be in the same area as the vice president. But Dan, a development within the last 45 minutes that I certainly don't want to begin to appear to speculate on, but we understand, Dan, that the congressional leadership this morning, after the attacks, was taken from Capitol Hill. They were taken to a secure location for a while under the protection of the Capitol Hill police, and then they dispersed and were operating out of private offices. Well, CBS News has learned from congressional sources just recently that the leadership of Congress, the congressional leadership, has been gathered together and is being ferried by helicopter individually, not together, individually, to a location outside of Washington, D.C. Now, of course, the big area that has been designated for Congress to go to in the event of a big national emergency, war, nuclear attack, is Weather Mountain in the western part of Virginia, Dan, but we can't say that that's where they've been taken. President Bush, after leaving Sarasota, Florida today, went to Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, where he made his first statement after receiving a full debriefing of what had taken place in New York and Washington. Here's what the president had to say.
Freedom itself was attacked this morning by a faceless coward, and freedom will be defended. I want to reassure the American people that the full resources of the federal government are working to assist local authorities to save lives and to help the victims of these attacks. Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts. I've been in regular contact with the Vice President, Secretary of Defense, the National Security Team, and my cabinet. We have taken all appropriate security precautions to protect the American people. Our military at home and around the world is on high alert status, and we have taken the necessary security precautions to continue the functions of your government. We have been in touch with the leaders of Congress and with world leaders to assure them that we will do whatever is necessary to protect America and Americans. I ask the American people to join me in saying a thanks for all the folks who have been fighting hard to rescue our fellow citizens, and to join me in saying a prayer for the victims and their families. The resolve of our great nation is being tested. But make no mistake, we will show the world that we will pass this test. God bless.
Strong words this morning from President Bush, or this afternoon from President Bush at Barksdale Air Force Base, where Air Force One touched down after the president left Sarasota, Florida, where he'd been holding an education event earlier today. Those strong words backed up not too long ago by British Prime Minister Tony Blair, who said, "This barbarism will stand as their shame for all eternity," speaking of the people who perpetrated this act. He also went on to say, Prime Minister Blair of Britain, "This is not a battle between the United States and terrorism, but between the free world and terrorism," and that Britain will stand shoulder to shoulder with the United States. Now, shortly after President Bush made that statement, Air Force One took off from Barksdale Air Force Base, destination unknown, but something curious and unusual happened just prior to Air Force One's departure. The normal, what's called tight pool that follows the president around, usually neighboring in the area between 13 and 14 people, was whittled down to 5 people. There were a number of people from the media who were left behind at Barksdale Air Force Base, which may be a suggestion that Air Force One is not headed back for Washington, because there would be no reason to leave those people if indeed it were headed back to Andrews Air Force Base, but that indeed Air Force One may be headed for another location. At this point, the president is being kept under tight wraps. No one is talking about his destination or his whereabouts, though we do understand that the vice president is still in Washington, D.C. But again, to reiterate, a change with the leadership of Congress. They have been gathered together and are being helicoptered, ferried individually out of Washington, D.C. to an undisclosed location. And again, as far as any explosion near Camp David, Dan, the Secret Service saying that they have no information about that. It doesn't appear to have happened. Dan?
Roberts, we know that Vice President Dick Cheney is in charge in the White House Situation Room with able assistance from Condoleezza Rice of the National Security Council. Do you know who is with President Bush? Who would be the expert, if you will, helping President Bush as he is in transit from Florida to Shreveport, Louisiana, and then to wherever else he's going?
Well, Dan, when the president left for this trip to Florida, it really was more of a political and an issues trip. So he took his top advisors. Karl Rove is with him. Karen Hughes is with him, as are many of his top political and issue advisors. General Powell was in South America. He is headed back to Washington. Condoleezza Rice stayed here. I do not know if Stephen Hadley, who is the Deputy National Security Advisor, might have been traveling with the president. But Dan, as it was just a quick overnight to Florida, there's no reason for Mr. Hadley to be there. So it may be that the president does not have one of his senior national security staff with him. There's probably a minor staff member, but certainly, Dan, they are doing everything they possibly can to hustle out to the president all of the expertise that he would need. But certainly, Dan, his closest cadre of advisors have been with him since he left on Monday afternoon.
Our White House correspondent John Roberts in Washington. We go to Scott Pelley in downtown on the tip of Manhattan, where the Twin Towers collapsed. Scott?
Dan, I'm just a block from one of the World Trade Center buildings. There's another large building that's a short distance from where the aircraft impacted. It is burning above me now. There are flames shooting out of several stories of this building. Firefighters have told us there is some concern that the building might collapse because apparently the opposite face of the building has been blown away. There is towering black smoke, as you've seen from your live cameras, still rising over the tip of Manhattan. I just spoke a moment ago with some firefighters from the 3rd Aviation Battalion out of the Bronx. They told me they got here right after the first airplane impacted. They were getting their tools off their truck when the building began to collapse, and they described diving into a subway station and hearing all of the World Trade Center tower falling all around them. Apparently their tools are still buried under the rubble, and one of the firefighters said that if the subway station had not been right there, they would certainly all be dead. They also described from the center of this scene a New York City police lieutenant who was telling them to be careful to get back, and as he was waving his arms in the air, a piece of debris apparently fell from the World Trade Center building and severely wounded this officer who was trying to help the firefighters stay safe. Dan, I'm at the corner of West Broadway and Murray Street, and it is an unbelievable scene here. There are huge drips of paper. This is all the office paper that was so carefully filed in all the hundreds and hundreds of offices in the World Trade Center. It's now scattered everywhere, drifting around like snow. I've seen letters from law schools. I've seen Christmas cards, all kinds of correspondence from what were all the neat, orderly offices and orderly lives in the World Trade Center now blowing around the street here in Lower Manhattan. And finally, couldn't help but notice for the last several hours, there have been several flights of U.S. Air Force F-15 fighter planes flying overhead. One might presume that they are flying combat air patrol over Manhattan to make sure that no other unauthorized aircraft get anywhere close to here, flying combat air patrol over the soil of the United States. Dan?
Scott Pelley in Lower Manhattan. Rocky Pasafaro is a chauffeur who was waiting for a client at Broadway and Chambers here in New York City, about a half mile from the World Trade Center buildings. Mr. Pasafaro, you saw one of the planes do what?
Well, you know, I was outside my car reading the paper, and two women walked by me, and they looked up and they says, "Look at that!" And as soon as I looked up, the plane entered the first building with the antenna, and just blew up in tremendous explosion and paper and smoke and everything, and it was just like chaos. And then, like 15 minutes later, I see the other plane coming northbound, hit the South Tower, and a big ball of flame. Everything was blown all over the place. It was terrible. I spent a lot of time in Nam, and I seen a lot of action, and this was scary. I seen people jumping off the buildings. I seen people getting they were running out in the streets, getting hit by cars. It was just ugly. It was just terrible.
Terrible indeed. Did you get a look? You said you saw first one plane. Did you get a look at that plane?
Yeah, it looked like a big passenger liner, yeah.
Well, American Airlines says it was one of their passenger airlines that hijacked. Did you get a look at the second plane?
Yeah, it looked like a small jet, double engine maybe, you know, one of those corporate jets, I guess, and it looked like that. It hit so fast.
American Airlines says it was another one of their commercial jets, but a smaller jet.
Version, yeah.
Now, tell us about, in the case of the first plane, about how high up on that tower did it hit?
It hit at least anywhere between 20 to 25 stories below the top.
So it's a 110-story building, so you'd say
about 90, maybe
85, 90 stories?
And it made a gigantic hole.
And the second plane?
Hit a lot lower, like in midsection of the building, like around floor 50, 60, around there.
Now, as terrible as it is, you said that you saw some people jump from the buildings.
I thought it was debris, but you've seen people jumping off that building. It was ugly. It was terrible. I've seen a lot of things in my lifetime, but I just can't imagine jumping off a building 110 stories high. I mean, it was terrible. I mean, it was just chaos everywhere. The explosion, the floors were shaking. I mean, that second plane that hit, it was a ball of flames, no exaggeration, 150 by 200 each way. That's how big it was. It was rocking, debris everywhere.
The ground shook?
Yeah, I got stuff all over my car, too.
Was there a great rumble, or was it just one huge boom?
Yeah, one big boom.
That was the first plane.
The first one was, yeah, it had a loud sound. I thought it went inside the building. I thought it looked like it was gonna hit the building, then like fall down. It didn't. It went right through, like a rocket. Went right through the building. Then it exploded inside, and there was debris, paper, smoke. It was just ugly.
Rocky Pasafaro, thank you for coming in. We appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
We go to Washington and Jim Stewart. Jim?
Dan, federal authorities are beginning to piece together a timeline which will assist them in their investigation, but quite frankly, at this point, don't answer as many questions as they raise. Let me run through with you what they report to be the sequence of events. The first explosion took place at 8:48 a.m., and this was the American Airlines Flight 11 from Boston to Los Angeles. It crashed into the World Trade Center. At 9:04, the picture that we have seen now many times, is the United Flight 175, also from Boston to Los Angeles, it too crashing into the World Trade Center, the second tower. The next explosion occurred at 9:38. That was in Washington, D.C., and involved American Airlines Flight 77, which was traveling from Dulles International Airport in Washington to Los Angeles. That plane crashed into the Pentagon. The fourth plane remains the big mystery. That was United Flight 93, Dan, which was departing Newark for San Francisco. It did not crash until a full hour after the Pentagon explosion. It went down at 10:20 a.m., according to the FBI, in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. And the sequence of events there was that this flight abruptly changed course en route from Newark to San Francisco, somewhere over Pennsylvania, and headed directly toward the Washington, D.C. area. According to senior officials who were in the command centers at FBI headquarters, there was literally a moment of great panic. They anticipated that this aircraft was headed toward the Washington area. The FAA informed the FBI that the flight path of that aircraft would take it over Camp David. An attempt was made, we were told, to communicate with that aircraft, and there was no response. Now, we are also told that there was a response. There was some sort of communication with the other aircraft, so that part of this mystery is unclear, but apparently someone on these aircraft did communicate back to the ground. Whether it was the pilots signaling distress or whether it was the people who had hijacked them is not known at this time. But the confusion over the Camp David is clearly that. This aircraft, United Aircraft Flight 93 from Newark to San Francisco, changed course abruptly and was on a flight path that was taking it over Camp David, headed directly toward the Washington area, when it mysteriously crashed. What caused that crash is entirely unclear at this point. Finally, intelligence officials say officially that they are attributing this, that has the, quote, signature of Al-Qaeda, which is the terrorist organization belonging to Osama bin Laden, but they go on to say, and I quote, "It is our leading theory, but it is only that. It is a theory. It has his signature. It fits with his past pattern of terrorist events against the United States." Dan?
Jim Stewart in Washington. The Federal Aviation Agency, the FAA, confirms now that all U.S. domestic flights have landed safely. Airports around the country, as they were directed to do, have shut down, some for the first time in their history. This is obviously an unprecedented situation, the situation being many people, how many we do not know, but many people have lost their lives in the collapse of the World Trade Centers here in New York, after each of the Trade Center buildings, 110 stories high, was hit by an aircraft. There have been fatalities at the Pentagon when a plane was crashed into the U.S. Defense Department there. And in this situation, there's much that is known already, but there's so much more that is unknown. The Walt Disney Company has shut down its U.S. parks and has begun what it calls assessing global operations. Disneyland in Tokyo and Paris are still open. It's this kind of thing. A lot of corporations are going to have to be making some decisions as the hours go by here. The Emmy Awards scheduled for Sunday have been canceled. Pope John Paul II condemned what he called the unspeakable horror of today's inhumane terrorist attacks, unquote, the Pope. Now, President Bush has spoken twice today, once just after the first attacks became clear on the World Trade Centers. He was in Florida doing some work there with school children. Also, we mentioned earlier his brother's in a gubernatorial re-election situation there. The president was on a domestic trip to Florida. He spoke there, said he was going back to Washington, but he didn't. He was next reported at Barksdale Air Force Base outside Shreveport, Louisiana. There he made a videotape, somewhat more extensive statement, the president saying, one, that these were in effect cowardly acts and that they would at least eventually be punished. That was the essence of his remarks. He also called for calm and for the American people to know that their government was continuing to work, continuing to operate. All this is a paraphrase of the president, and the president on both occasions asked for the prayers of those families most directly affected by the death and destruction wrought today. Now, the situation at the moment is here in New York. Hospitals are absolutely overwhelmed. Keep in mind how many hospitals there are in New York. The mayor told us, I think it's something like 150 or 60 hospitals. The hospital situation is being stabilized now. Obviously, in the early going, they had to triage out. Triage meaning, make decisions on who gets immediate treatment and who does not. The situation in the hospitals is, what last report was beginning to stabilize some because there is so much hospital help available in New York and in the surrounding areas. Some of the casualties were taken to hospitals outside New York into the suburban areas. Some elements of the National Guard have been called into service in New York to back up New York's outstanding police and fire departments. The police and fire departments here, of course, in this large city, being very large, some 40,000 plus police when you count the transit police available here, very large fire department, but no city anywhere in the world could count only on its own resources when attacked in this way. Now, police say no one is going to the World Trade Center until the fire is out, and the fire is definitely not out. There are people believed trapped inside the debris of the now totally collapsed World Trade Centers. Both of the World Trade Centers have collapsed. Mayor Rudolph Giuliani told us in our CBS News interview that some of the people found have been trapped. Others leaped from the building in terror, in effect forced out by the fire and explosions. And one pauses almost every time you see these scenes, because if you didn't know that this was real and this videotape was taken as it happened, and you see some debris and in some cases people coming down the side of the building, you would say it must be from a horror movie. It is horrible. It is not a movie. John Serra, forgive me, is on the telephone. He was on the 47th floor of one of the World Trade Center buildings when the plane hit. Mr. Serra, thank you for being with us. What was it like?
It was very scary. We thought it was a bomb at first. The whole building shook. I was in number 1 World Trade Center, 47th floor, and I work in securities area. And first we thought it was a bomb. Then we all ran towards the main door away from the windows. And we saw debris flying outside and everything. And then out in the hallways, there was a lot of smoke. So we stayed in the office. We didn't go out into the hallway. We tried to get in touch with people to find out what was going on. Someone's relative called and said that it was on CNN that a plane had crashed into the building. And another person I work with called and spoke to a friend she knew down in security, and he confirmed that, and they told us to stay put, not to leave yet. A few minutes later, we were told it was okay to start going down the stairs, and it was about 45 of us. We waited till everybody got out, and then we started down the stairs, and there was not that much smoke in the stairways, and we all had wet rags and kept it in front of our face, and when we got out into the stairs, people were coming down from the 70th and 80th floors, and later on we saw some injured people. People would yell down, "Stay to your right," and people that had burns and some were cut up or whatever. We went down first, and also some pregnant women shut down. Everybody was very helpful and orderly in the stairs, and then we started seeing firemen after we got down to the, I think, third. Firemen were coming up, walking up, carrying equipment, and at one floor, people were passing out bottles of water from a water machine so we could, pour the water on our heads and keep the rags wet. And the smoke was not that bad, We were able to get down slowly, and I think it was 10 o'clock when I got out of the building, and that's when some debris fell down, and I was across the street, and we ran down into like a subway entrance. At that point, I became covered with the soot and the ash and everything. And then I just walked up north as far as I could, up Broadway. My sister works at Spring Street in the Village, and I went to her office. She wasn't at work, but the people in the office helped me clean up, and then I walked across the Williamsburg Bridge and came to my sister's house in Greenpoint. And I was able to contact my my wife and children, let them know I was okay, and friends. It was horrible. It was unbelievable. I cannot fathom that the buildings collapsed. Thank you.
John Serra.
Yes.
Eyewitness who was on the 47th floor of one of the World Trade Center buildings. Thank you.
Thank you.
For your moving eyewitness account. We go to Los Angeles. Brian Jenkins with the RAND Corporation, one of the world's ranking experts on terrorism. Mr. Jenkins, thank you for being with us. This is unprecedented today. Give us some context for it.
It is unprecedented in terms of the enormity of scale of this attack. It has long been feared by those who analyze terrorism, who look at these things, that we could see a major attack on U.S. soil. And certainly there have been many scenarios that have been tested in the various exercises that have been conducted in cities across the United States, but there is nothing in the exercises that prepares you for the stunning images that we have seen today.
We are interrupting CBS's coverage in that interview with this terrorism expert to bring you the latest on what is going on here in Jacksonville earlier today when the FAA virtually shut down the air system here in the United States. There were 25 planes that were diverted to Jacksonville. There were 5 that were already on the ground that were not allowed to leave. And now we're told that all the people who were on those planes have been put on buses and are on their way now to their destinations.
We're going to check in with Fred Halstead, who is reporting to us live from JIA, where, Fred, we suspect about the only people left are airport personnel, security, and the media.
That's exactly right. Even airline personnel have gone home. While I've been here, we've seen most of them leave. Right now, the airport is officially closed. No one is here. Those 25 planes that were diverted still remain outside on the runway. Most of those people, as you mentioned, were put on the buses. Earlier today, you can see that the gates were closed here at Jacksonville International Airport. As I said, 25 planes diverted. Airport is closed. Many of the people were put on the buses. Police dogs here at the airport security are doing a clean sweep of the airport. That includes the concourse, the parking garage, and also many of the airplanes in the airport lobby where we are itself. Also, the people who were diverted to their destinations were put either on buses to be taken to Orlando, Miami, West Palm, Tampa. A lot of them were also taken to the various hotels here in this area. Airport security tell us they are on what's called a level 4 security alert, and this is the reason why they say they're on that high level of security.
An alert 4 is the highest level of security at an airport, and which means the airport is closed, is not open to the general public.
Astonishing, but as soon as the pilot said that there was a East Coast catastrophe and that we had to come out of the air, I figured it was either a nuclear plant putting radioactivity into the air or some...
Now, that was one passenger who was in the sky, in the air, when all this happened, and he described his experience, exactly what the pilot told him and exactly how they got him to the ground. Once again, Jacksonville International Airport is closed. If you come out here, there's police out here who will divert you and turn you around. It's that simple. Most of the passengers who were diverted from their destinations, like I said, have been put on buses, taken to their final destination, or have been put up here at local hotels. And once again, we are on a level 4 security alert, the highest alert possible. The only people here now are still some of the airport officials who are still in meetings and have come out to brief the media on exactly what is going on. Of course, that's the latest from the airport. We'll keep you updated if anything happens. For now, we're live at JIA. I'm Fred Halstead.
And there are no other new developments here locally within the last half hour to tell you about, other than to repeat what the mayor said earlier today, that there really is no cause for alarm. There have been no credible threats against our area.
We're going to be hearing from the governor live at about 3 o'clock this afternoon. That's about 28 minutes from now. We'll be bringing you the governor's statement live as well. We're now going to go back to Dan Rather and CBS News.
Reported to you earlier, the street is thick with several inches of muck that is made of construction material and files and paperwork, all sorts of things that were in the World Trade Center building. But Dan, the site of the building itself, the site of the World Trade Center tower that I can see here, is a hulk about 15 stories tall, shattered, broken at the top, with huge columns of smoke rising in front of the sun. Sorry, it's very smoky down here. And the smoke has turned bright orange as it rises over Manhattan because of the backlight from the sun. Dan?
Scott Pelley, live from Lower Manhattan. Now, as part of our CBS News continuing coverage of the events of this day, I want to point out to you that every half hour, on the half hour and on the hour mark, we'll try to give you a summation of late information and what's happened during the day. So, if you're not riveted to the television screen, just know that at or about the half-hour mark and the hour mark, we'll try to bring you up to date. Now, no suburban service in Manhattan. The only train service is leaving the city. NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, has called what's called an emergency meeting for 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That'd be about 25 minutes from now. New York City hospitals now report themselves to be in, quote, desperate need of blood. We mentioned earlier that this was inevitable. It has happened. The American Red Cross is keeping New York City donor stations open. Now, if you're saying to yourself, what can I do? One of the things you can do is arrange to give blood if you're in an area, especially if you're in an area of New York City away from the downtown area where all the emergency work is being done. And let us note that on a national basis, there's a shortage of blood supplies, and when you have a catastrophic event such as this, and it's no good describing it as any other way, you have a catastrophic event such as this, there are bound to be shortages of blood. So if you want to know something you can do to help in this situation and in general, one would be to give blood. The Pennsylvania Medical Society has been asked to begin collecting names of volunteer doctors to travel to New York City and to the District of Columbia. Remember that the Pentagon was hit. To what extent the damage there, we do not know. What we do know is that there have been some fatalities at the Pentagon. How many? We do not know. There's absolutely no way to know what the casualties are, but mark well, this is a scene of the Pentagon where the smoke still bellows along the flats of the Potomac. The Pentagon in Northern Virginia, of course, just across the Potomac from the District of Columbia itself. But the casualties are expected to be very high from the World Trade Center collapse. Some people are said to be trapped in the debris. They're trying to organize to get those people out. But it's no good ducking or dodging around the facts that, particularly in the World Trade Center, the casualties are going to be high. Senator John McCain, United States Senator from Arizona, is on the telephone with us now. Senator McCain, thank you for being with us. Tell us what you know.
And I don't know much more than what you do. I think it's been very well covered. I can only say that this is a great nation. We can overcome this. We'll rally behind the president. We will find out who perpetrated this outrage. We will punish them, and we will ensure that it doesn't happen again. And I want Americans, if I could add my small voice, we should remain calm. We're a great nation. We can overcome this. And the best way that the great nation acts is that we get through this tragedy and we make sure that it never happens again.
Senator McCain, if you can stay with us for just a moment, we're going to switch to New York Mayor Giuliani live. He's holding a statement. Hold on for us now. Thank you.
Send a message that the city of New York and the United States of America is much stronger than any group of barbaric terrorists, that our democracy, that our rule of law, that our strength and our willingness to defend ourselves will ultimately prevail. And I'd ask the people of New York City to do everything that they can to cooperate, not to be frightened, to go about their lives as normal. Everything is safe right now in the city, and the people who are doing the relief effort need all the help they can get. And then, Governor, thank you very much for your assistance and your help and your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, for your leadership through this crisis. This is a vicious attack upon New York. It's an attack upon America. It's an attack upon the whole concept of freedom and our way of life. And we cannot let these attacks succeed. The first step has to be to make sure we do everything in our power to protect the people and to save the lives of those whose lives are still at risk, and to help those who have been injured. And I want to commend the mayor, and I want to thank my colleagues from Connecticut, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and the federal government have all offered and made ready support to help us deal with this ongoing crisis. The people of New York are not only the freest and most diverse people in the world, world, we're also, I believe, the most capable of rising to meet the challenges of this type of attack. And right now, we want New Yorkers to remain calm, to go about their business, to appreciate the fact that everything to provide for their safety is being done, to appreciate that everything that can be done to provide for the health and the needs of the people who are still at risk is being done, and that we will continue to work to make sure that we get through this as strongly and quickly as possible. I want to thank the federal administration. Secretary Thompson has been on the phone with me a number of times, as well as the President, for what they are offering and prepared to do. And we're just confident that, well, this is a horrible attack, and one that is despicable and really unthinkable in its magnitude. We will get through this. And we will continue to have a great and free country.
Governor Pataki of New York, standing at the side of New York City Mayor Giuliani. On the phone with us, Senator John McCain. Senator, you're speaking to us from where?
I'm on Capitol Hill, Dan.
Senator, this is a time for assessing what has happened to us today, as well as extending what we can in the way of help and our prayers to the families of those who've been most directly affected. But the question hangs out there that we pride ourselves on the defense of the United States of America, and we spend hundreds of billions of dollars preparing for, the eventuality of war. But how much thinking has gone into the new kind of war? This is something we haven't faced before.
Well, something that you and I have discussed in the past. We went from a very dangerous world to, during the Cold War, where we faced the threat of nuclear incineration, to a very dangerous world where we face these kinds of terrorist threats, including proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. And I think the reality is that we'll have to assess our intelligence capabilities. I don't think there's any doubt that we have superb technical intelligence capability. We abandoned to a large degree the human intelligence capabilities back in the late 1970s, and we may have to. I've always said that we needed to do more in that direction. I think that it is remarkable, some of the things already that we know, including the fact that these hijackers must have known how to fly an airplane. That's a pretty your average terrorist doesn't have that capability. The sophistication of this operation is mind-boggling, and obviously we're going to want to know why our intelligence capabilities were not what we wanted them to be.
Senator, true or untrue that there have been occasions over the last, let us say, decade, when the evidence pointed clearly to some sort of state-sponsored terrorism. I'm not suggesting that this was state-sponsored terrorism. I'm saying clearly we don't know what this is. Yep. But is it true or untrue that in the past, over the last decade, there have been those occasions when the evidence pointed to certain states, and that for one reason or another, neither the executive nor legislative branch of our U.S. government wanted to attend to that, the decision was made to look the other way?
I don't know if the intention, if the action was to just look the other way, but I think there were indications. Whether there was conclusive proof or not was a judgment that was made by our leaders, both in the executive and legislative branch. I have felt that there's been involvement, but I'll be honest with you, Dan, I never thought that an operation of this sophistication and size would take place. I just never did. But I don't think there's any doubt that there are countries, Iraq, Iran, Libya, North Korea, and others, who we know engage in proliferation of capabilities and have from time to time involved themselves in state-sponsored terrorism. But never did we imagine on a scale such as this.
Senator John McCain, thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
The earliest the FAA says it would consider lifting ground stoppages, this has to do with air traffic in this country, will be 12 noon tomorrow. Again, as we have so often, we need to pause and absorb that. This has never happened in the history of the country. The FAA early in the day said it wanted all flights in the country stopped, just shut it down, given the situation. Now the FAA says that it will consider lifting the ground stoppages at or about 12 noon tomorrow. Obviously, that could be subject to change, but that's what the FAA says at the moment. Sandra Hughes, CBS News correspondent, is at LAX, the Los Angeles International Airport, where some of the flights involved in the hijacked suicide missions, as it turned out today, were headed. Sandra?
And the last few hours inside, excuse me, I'm just going to have to take this out of my ear because I can hear myself and it's very distracting. I've just spent the last few hours inside the LA International Airport. It has now been evacuated and closed down. I spent most of my time at the American terminal, and we saw some family members, what appeared to be very grieving family members arriving. They were surrounded by police and whisked up the stairs to a private room. We're assuming that those were family members of some of the folks who were on those two American flights that crashed. But most of what we saw was chaos, confusion with the passengers there, people trying to book flights, most people just being told, go home, call us later. We then walked down to the United Terminal, a much different scene down there, Dan. It was a heightened state of security. Police tape was all around the terminal. It was completely closed down. We saw the Los Angeles Police Department bomb squad suiting up and going inside the United Terminal. We tried to get a little bit closer, and we were pushed back. Just as we've been standing here a little bit away from the airport, we have seen many police cars with their lights and sirens on, many emergency vehicles rushing in that direction. So what appears to be a heightened state of alert. Right now, they are just continuing to evacuate everyone from the Los Angeles airport who is an essential personnel. Also, just around California, Disneyland, the major attractions, they've all been closed down. The Bay Bridge up in San Francisco, any major bridge like that in the state of California, a heightened state of alert. Many state buildings have been closed down and evacuated. That's what's going on here in California, Dan.
Sandra Hughes at Los Angeles International Airport. We go to Mika Brzezinski, who is live now in Lower Manhattan. Mika?
Yeah, Dan, I've just moved up from PS 89, which is 3 blocks from the scene, Dan, because what they've told me is that we had to get out. They were going to try and get rid of what's left of Tower 1, and I was in the line of fire, so I ran 10 blocks up to our SATREC here on Canal and West, and I've had a first chance to take a look at what is behind me, and I can't believe it. This is Midtown Manhattan. This is New York, and the heart of it is a scene of terror and hate. I've also caught up with some families here. Dan, I don't know if you remember, I was speaking earlier at the school with a frantic father who was trying to find his son who went to PS 99. Those children were evacuated to nearby schools. He couldn't find his son. He also couldn't find his wife, who was in Gateway Plaza, the apartments right across from the World Financial Center when all this happened. His wife and his 3-year-old child were in there. He could only get close enough to see that the windows were blown out. And now I have with me Michael Gashler and Julie Brown and their 2.5-year-old son. I take it you live there as well. What can you tell me about the scene from what you know?
Well, it's Gateway Plaza right now is evacuated, basically. And what's happening is that there's another building that's about to come down. They called it Building 80. But what I understand for that father, that the kids in school are safe. As we walked up...
The kids in all of the local schools, Stuyvesant High School, PS 89, which is right at the scene of the disaster, they have been transferred to nearby schools. PS 3 is one of them. They are all okay, but a lot of parents like you trying to find their families. And Gateway Plaza, it appears the apartments were not unscathed in this.
No, especially the ones facing the World Trade Center. They were blasted out, and we were lucky being in the apartment and not evacuating like they asked us to, because we were safe inside. We were able to close the windows, and we didn't then suffocate when the debris came down, when the buildings collapsed.
I take it as this happened, you were actually about to bring your son to a daycare center inside the World Trade Center?
5 World Trade Center, yeah. On the plaza level. That's where we have it at the Children's Discovery Center. We don't know whatever happened to that, but I got to believe it's buried by now with the debris. Right. But we normally would be there at 8:30, and we just got up late, so we got lucky.
What is your reaction, Julie, to what you're hearing so far about this being an act of terror and seeing this literally at your home?
Well, having been down here when the bomb went off back in the early 90s, I don't know what to say about that. I'm still in shock over it all happening, and that time I was lucky enough not even to be at home. I was in Midtown, and this time being at home, I have to say that my first concern really was to get my son out of there.
Like many families who are right now struggling to be reunited, some of them will be lucky enough to have that happen. I also have with me Michael Ingbar, who was sleeping with earplugs on when the plane began to fly toward, one of the planes began to fly toward the World Trade Center. Tell me what happened after that.
I was just on my roof. I had my binoculars, and I'm looking at it, and I thought it was a Superman movie or something, or a science fiction movie. And then I saw a huge explosion. I saw people falling out of windows, and I couldn't tell whether they were jumping or they were just falling. It looked like or pieces of metal. And then I put my binoculars on, and I saw it was actual people just jumping out of the buildings or falling out of the buildings. And just a big explosion, like it was explosion with fire. It was like a movie set. It didn't look real. I still believe I'm in a dream or something, or a nightmare.
I think a lot of us do. A lot of us even covering the story. I was frantically at one point trying to get in touch with my husband, who's also a reporter. Everybody in some way, shape, or form is connected to this in some way, with so many people working inside the World Trade Towers, 50,000 people at height level, Dan. It is going to be an act of terror with reverberations across the country. And of course, this morning we are still picking up the pieces and trying to figure out exactly what happened, and there are people trying to figure out where to go. They're literally walking up the West Side Highway, which is usually crowded with cars trying to get in the middle of the morning, and right now it is literally a walking path. The only thing you see coming through here right now are literally hundreds of fire trucks and EMS crews. When I was down there, I was close to the scene, at the scene, literally when the towers came down. Byron Pitts and I were actually standing at the corner of Murray and West, where you heard Scott Pelley reporting from, and we were there when the towers went down. We literally ran from the roll of thick debris and smoke to the point when we ran into PS 89 to get as far quickly escaped from this sort of toxic cloud. Literally, when we got inside the school went black. It was like night, because when the cloud came over us and the debris started to hit, when you literally went back outside again, where we were standing was only crushed cars, debris, and cement. Dan.
Mika Brzezinski, live, reporting from Lower Manhattan, although the picture you're seeing at this particular moment is videotape of the collapse of the World Trade Centers. Yes, both of the 110-story World Trade Centers have collapsed. All U.S. security markets have closed. A conference call is scheduled tonight to decide whether to reopen tomorrow. Bellevue Hospital medical director, quote, "This is a catastrophe of unparalleled proportions," unquote. And the reason it is a result of what you're seeing on videotape. First one of the World Trade Center towers collapsed. Yes, collapsed. It looks like one of those scenes of an old building being, purposely dynamited and blown up. In this case, hijacked airliners, two. Both of them American Airlines planes, apparently, were crashed, first one, then another, into the World Trade Center. And then first one tower and then the other collapsed, completely collapsed, and buildings around them collapsed. People were seen jumping, being forced out of the building on high floors. People on the street gasped as each person was seen coming out of a window. Abraham Lincoln, 1864. "Let not him who is houseless pull down the house of another, but let him work diligently and build one for himself, thus by his example, assuring that his own shall be safe from violence when built." Yes, it's a long quote, but something to ponder on this day, when America has much to ponder, including the fact, and it is the fact, that we've been taught since we were school children that the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. Clearly, our vigilance has not been what it should have been in the days preceding this catastrophe today. And if you think the word catastrophe is an overstatement, then perhaps you want to rethink it. Because many, many people have died on this day. Some at the Pentagon, we hope a few, we don't know how many at the Pentagon when a plane crashed there. But the mayor of New York, police officials, everybody says when the death toll is finally counted from the total collapse of both of these towers of the World Trade Center, there will be a high loss of life. Some people are believed trapped in the remains as we speak, and operations are being mounted to try to get to them. You remember those scenes from Oklahoma City. Remember Oklahoma City, one federal building, terrible as it was, how long it took to get organized, to get those people who were trapped in the remains, as was the case in Oklahoma City. Many heroic deeds this day, most of those deeds we do not yet know, but police, firemen, ordinary citizens have performed their heroic deeds this day, and while many lives have been lost, many lives have been saved. And it's a day that will, as was the case with Pearl Harbor, live in infamy in American history. We go to John Roberts in Washington. John, perhaps bring people up to date on where the president is and where he isn't at this hour.
Well, Dan, as we try to grasp the enormity of this tragedy, and as many times as you see the pictures, they still hit you afresh, an assault against all your senses. It's just impossible to understand the exact magnitude of all of this. The White House is trying to put the pieces back together here so that they can show that they are in control, to show America that they have a leader who is in command here and a person who is going to lead this country against the scourge of terrorism nationwide. Our what's called in-town travel pool was activated just a little while ago, been taken over to what we'll only describe as a government building in downtown Washington, D.C., for fear that people may be watching this broadcast in order to determine where the leaders of government are for a briefing about what the government does next. As best we can ascertain, Dan, the president most recently was at Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, where he made the address that you played the videotape of just a short while ago, and is now somewhere in transit over the United States, whereabouts and destination classified at this point. We understand that the vice president is still in Washington, D.C., though the congressional leadership has been ferried separately via separate helicopters to a location outside. But Dan, I think, and this has now been corroborated by two different sources now, there is a move by the White House to try to get the president back to the White House today. Dan, you mentioned a couple of hours ago now, at least, that the president want to get back to the White House today as a show of force against these terrorists. I believe that the administration is of the same mind, and they are in negotiations now with the Secret Service to make sure that they can adequately assure the safety of the president so they can get him back to the White House. Speaking against that, Dan, though, might be this idea that when the president on Air Force One left Barksdale Air Force Base, they trimmed down the number of media personnel, the White House press corps, who was following him from about 14 to 5, which may indicate that they were going to a smaller location, Dan. So still the information somewhat up in the air, all of this again classified because they do not want to reveal where the president or the vice president are at this point, but we should know more very soon. We'll get back to you on that.
Our White House correspondent John Roberts, and emphasizing that whenever the president of the United States travels, he's on Air Force One, he has an incredibly sophisticated communication system aboard that aircraft. And while, as John Roberts mentioned, from all appearances and all reports, Vice President Dick Cheney, a very experienced elected and appointed official, is in charge at the White House itself, in a secure position below ground in the White House, we believe. And Condoleezza Rice, head of the National Security Council, while on a minute-by-minute, hour-by-hour basis, at some point, it appears that they were very much, at least in partial charge. Let no one, no matter how you feel politically, misunderstand. The President of the United States is in charge. He is the commander-in-chief. And whatever anybody thinks of him or doesn't think of him in the moment, he's the commander-in-chief. He's the leader of the nation. He is in Air Force One. He is in instantaneous communication when he wants to be any place in the world, and there should not be any misunderstanding about that. There'll be plenty of time later in the days and weeks to follow about whether he and his White House operation deported themselves as they could have and should have today. But as of this moment, no one should have any misunderstanding about the president being in charge. And with that in mind, we go to Bob Schieffer in Washington. Bob?
Well, Dan, very much in line with what John Roberts was saying about members of the White House staff wanting to get the president back to Washington because they believe that is a way to show the terrorists that they are not giving in. There is very much that same spirit up at the Capitol at this point. The Capitol Police Chief told us just a while ago that congressional leaders are going to make a decision later today about reopening the Capitol tomorrow, because they think that is the way to show that this government is still working. Joe Biden, who's the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, said earlier this afternoon, this Congress ought to be in session. When we're not in session, we're saying to the terrorists that they are winning at this point, and we don't want them to say that. So that is the mood. But of course, as John Roberts also pointed out, there are these tremendous security precautions and considerations that have to be taken at this point. So at this point, all we know is that the vice president, for example, is in a secure place. That is the only clue
that members of his staff will give us as to where he is at this point. He's with his Chief of Staff, Louis Libby. His wife, Lynn Cheney, is also with him. But the White House staff tells us only the Vice President is in a secure place. One other point, intelligence sources at this point have really not given members of Congress a great deal of information. Either they don't know or they're holding back on that. We are told that there will be substantive intelligence briefings for members of the intelligence committees later this afternoon, but at this point about all they know is that these were well-coordinated attacks, well-coordinated, well-planned out. At this point, it's our understanding that members of Congress have been given no information as to who specifically might be behind these attacks. We should also add, and these intelligence sources pointed out to us, that security forces, American forces around the world, have been on a considerably high state of alert in recent weeks, almost since the bombing of the USS Cole some months ago.
We're interrupting Bob Schieffer because in just a moment we're going to go live to Tallahassee to hear from the governor. Many of you have called and asked about donating blood. We have this information to pass on to you. Both the Florida-Georgia Blood Alliance and the Red Cross have been receiving sizable donations of blood from many volunteers, but here are the rules the way they're worked out. Any blood donated to the Florida-Georgia Blood Alliance will have to stay in the community unless an order is issued for the blood to be sent to New York. However, any blood donations that are given to the American Red Cross can be taken immediately to New York. We wanted to pass that on to you.
We also have wanted to tell you there is a citywide prayer gathering that is scheduled for noon on Wednesday at the First Baptist Church, downtown Jacksonville, Ruth Lindsay Auditorium. This is actually a non-denominational services that First Baptist is making their facility available for, and it is non-denominational, again, prayer service for the entire city at noon on Wednesday at First Baptist Church downtown. I have a list here of other churches throughout our area that are planning services this evening, anywhere from 6 to 7:30 tonight. We can't possibly get to all of them on the air, but please do call your local church to find out about prayer services in your area.
More and more businesses are closing down. As we've told you earlier, all the federal office buildings have now closed, including the federal courthouse. The malls are closing, largely out of respect for the victims in New York City. We have received information from Tallahassee that since this happened, Governor Bush and his top aides, and top law enforcement people have been working to make sure everything in the state is secure. As you've heard, the Disney World and the parks in Orlando have closed down, again, largely out of respect and just by the fact that people don't know what to do. You know, you'd feel funny going to an amusement park at a time like this, I think. And
Education Secretary Jim Horn has closed all state university campuses throughout the evening classes tonight. We don't know yet about tomorrow, again, as a precaution to secure statewide facilities. We are expecting the governor to come and address the state momentarily now. And other than, as we've said, this information about the blood drive, that if you'd like to get blood up to those victims in New York, the best place to go is to the Red Cross, because that it will immediately be sent to the area of greatest need. We understand, as you've been watching the network coverage, that the hospitals are pretty well maxed out in New York City.
Jacksonville Airport, of course, remains closed. It's undergoing a security check. There has been an announcement by the FAA that there is an intention to reopen air service in the United States tomorrow at 12 noon. Details of that have not exactly been have been worked out yet. At least by 12 noon tomorrow, they say that they're going to be reopening the air service. But of course, there's not going to be any air service tonight whatsoever.
The military bases throughout the country are on Delta Alert, which is in fact a wartime condition. That is the highest security that military bases can be on. We've shown you some of the traffic outside of Mayport and NIS as people are leaving that base. Only non-essential personnel are there. Even hospital visits, routine scheduled doctor's appointments at the hospital at NIS have been canceled through Friday of this week. We also know, having confirmed, that the USS Kennedy, of course, based in Mayport, is on its way to New York City along with the George Washington out of Norfolk. The two aircraft carriers will be in New York Harbor to assist the injured and also to provide protection for the city. Our Brad Puffer has been standing by outside Mayport base all day. Brad?
That's right. We did hear that the JFK left early this morning on a routine mission. They were supposed to be gone for about a month in training when they were redeployed to head up towards the waters off of Manhattan. I talked with a couple wives of sailors and those aboard the JFK as well as in that battle fleet. They say that they were certainly shocked and have been glued to their TVs this morning watching everything unfold. I also talked with some sailors' wives of those not in the battle group. They say they got a call early this morning basically saying, get back to the base, get your stuff together, get in here and be ready to go at any time. And that's pretty much what's happened. All the essential personnel are now back on the base. All the non-essential personnel, those who just work on the base, either at the McDonald's or at Raytheon or Lockheed Martin, have been sent home. There's been a flood of cars out of here all day long, and now a huge backup, as you can see, at the entrance to Mayport, as they have secured only one lane in. They are at the highest level of ThreatCon Delta, and again, that is the highest threat level possible. They are checking everyone, doing random checks of cars, making sure that only those essential personnel get back onto the base. Although if you do live on base or you're a school child in a school bus coming back to the base, you will of course be let on at that time. We are going to continue to monitor things out here at Mayport as throughout the day and as things change. We're live here at Mayport. I'm Brad Puffer.
Brad, what kind of mood are the people in that you've talked to? Solemn, certainly, sad, shocked. We heard from one report earlier of a military person who had fire in his eye over what has happened.
Yeah, basically just shock. Everybody like ourselves just staring at the television, watching this unfold, and then starting to think, well, how does this impact their family members and their loved ones as they head off to assist in some way? A lot of just not understanding, trying to come to grips with what has happened out here. But of course, everybody here is prepared for this in some way, although you can never be prepared for this type of act of terrorism. They've been out here, they've trained for this day, they've trained to assist, and they are certainly acting as quickly as possible to respond to this tragedy.
Thank you very much, Brad. We're still standing by waiting for Governor Bush to hold a news conference in Tallahassee to announce the preparations that the state has taken to try to respond to this tragedy, and perhaps he might be able to shed a little bit of light on maybe some conversation that he might have had with the president, although I don't know that the president would have even time to talk to his brother in a condition like this, situation like this.
We have had a few calls to our newsroom of people who are in the Armed Forces Reserves having been called into service, but we have had no independent confirmation that the reserves have been called in at this point, even though, as we've been reporting, all of the military bases are on a wartime alert status.
There's been no official order, by the way, to fly flags, either at half-staff or just to fly flags in general, but many people have called and said they're putting up their flags because that's just an expression that they feel like they need to make at a time like this. I think we're going to go back now to Dan Rather because we have a TV set over here that looks into the governor's conference room, and he has not yet come to the microphone, but the moment that he does, we'll interrupt Dan again, and we will go to the governor live in Tallahassee.
So we'll send you back now to CBS News.
A Dulles to Los Angeles flight would figure to be quite a large airliner, and a Boston to Los Angeles flight would figure to be quite a large airliner. We have no explanation to that. A Boeing 757, one of the planes believed to have crashed in the World Trade Center, and a Boeing 767, another plane that believed to have crashed into the other World Trade Center. That'll perhaps be sorted out as time goes along, but American says it believes that it's these two planes crashed into the World Trade Centers. Then United Flight 175, also a Boeing 767, large aircraft, flying Boston to Los Angeles, was hijacked in flight. And then United Flight number 93, Newark to San Francisco, another Boeing 757 was hijacked. Those are the four planes known to have been hijacked. Bill Richardson, one time, in fact, until fairly recently, head of the Department of Energy in Washington, also once the United States ambassador to the United Nations, very experienced politically, and also someone who's been involved with intelligence information about terrorist networks, is with us in our Washington Bureau. Mr. Secretary, it's good to see you again.
Thank you, Dan.
Try to give us some perspective here, and also let's address the alleged bin Laden connection to all this.
We're now going to take you to Governor Bush live in Tallahassee.
It is with a very heavy heart that I address the people of the great state of Florida this afternoon. Today our country was attacked, and perhaps many thousands of our countrymen lost in a terrorist offensive against multiple targets in two of America's most beautiful cities. The aim of the terrorists is clear: to hurt and to humble America. They have indeed hurt us, but they will never humble us. They will never humble us because Americans have always risen to the occasion when our liberty has been threatened and when liberty must be defended. America's leadership, strength, and history will lead us not only to survive this terrorist attack, but also to remember why we're the greatest country on the face of the earth. Here in Florida, we weep for our countrymen across the country who have lost loved ones today. Many of the folks in Washington, D.C. and the New York area who have lost their lives have family members here in Florida. I've been on the phone attempted to get on the phone with Governor Pataki and Mayor Giuliani. We've communicated with them to offer any support, both from the government perspective as well as from a people-to-people perspective for the state of New York, for the city of New York City, and of course Washington, D.C. We're also taking action today. Today I've signed an executive order declaring a state of emergency in the state of Florida. This is just a preemptive action to ensure that we're prepared for any eventuality. My executive order implements our state comprehensive emergency action plan. It appoints Florida Department of Law Enforcement Commissioner Tim Moore as incident commander and Greg Fugate as the state coordinating officer for disaster relief. I will introduce Commissioner Moore shortly, who will speak on specific security measures being taken to protect our citizens. Nevertheless, based on the information as we know it, and barring any developments to the contrary, the state of Florida will be open for business tomorrow morning. This includes the Capitol and all state universities and community colleges. The best way to defeat terrorism is to get back to work serving our people and our state. I encourage Floridians to contact their local governments for further information. I ask three things of every Floridian here today. First, if you have an American flag, fly it. I've directed state buildings to fly our Star-Spangled Banner at half-mast, our traditional public display of sorrow and loss. But I also ask all those Floridians who have flags to fly them. Even at half-mast, our flag, no flag in the world, flies as proudly and as majestically as the American flag. Second, I ask every Floridian seeking information or opportunities to help victims to contact their local blood center as well as their local Red Cross chapter. The local blood centers are able to assist in the relief of critical blood supplies, blood shortages that are going to exist and exist already in the New York area and Washington, D.C. Within 48 hours, the Red Cross will be able to provide information on the welfare of immediate family members. And if you want to get additional information, you can use the toll-free number 1-888-993-1023. By the end of today, we will also have myflorida.com, www.myflorida.com, available to get additional information on how to help during this time of grief and time of need. Third, I ask every Floridian who has ever prayed to pray tonight. Pray for the victims of this cowardly attack and their loved ones. Pray for the missing and the loved ones holding vigil between hope and despair. Pray for the emergency workers. We're standing here in Florida's Emergency Operations Center, and I know, as we all know, the quality and professionalism of those drawn to this profession. They are well trained for the types of devastating situations that they're dealing with now, and they need our prayers as well. America is a great nation. Its greatness is revealed most clearly in times of crisis. In times when we're challenged, we must not despair in this present challenge. We must be strong. Commissioner?
Thank you, Governor. Throughout the day today, we've been in constant contact with local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies here in the state of Florida. We've organized our effort around what might be potential terrorist attacks here in our state. Our tourism attractions, our energy sites, our government buildings, our airports, our transportation and communication hubs here in our state. We've just completed our 2 p.m. conference call, and I can tell you still there's no verifiable direct information of any site in the state of Florida being the subject of these attacks. Several facilities have closed themselves voluntarily. Disney, Busch Gardens, SeaWorld, in an effort to protect our citizens. We've had some mandatory closings, as the governor mentioned earlier today. We closed the Capitol, the Turlington building. Some of the federal buildings have been closed by the GSA out of Atlanta. Some schools in South Florida, a few schools in South Florida have been closed, and all universities and community colleges have been closed. We continue to communicate directly with law enforcement, local law enforcement, state and federal, across our state to make sure that we're guarding against the unexpected. And again, we encourage the public, if you have any information, anything at all that seems the least bit out of the ordinary, we urge you to contact your local law enforcement agency or to contact the Department of Law Enforcement Intelligence Hotline at 1-800-342-0820. We've had a series of bomb threats. And let me say that, and remind everybody that a false bomb threat in the state of Florida is a felony. And I assure you we'll prosecute the people that are convicted of that make that call vigorously. That's taken valuable resources away from a public safety mission to respond to this kind of nonsense. And I encourage people that have information about those that might be engaging in this copycat activity and this despicable behavior to give us a call as well. At the governor's direction and following his communication to both the mayor and the governor of the state of New York and New York City, I've personally been in contact with my counterpart, Superintendent of New York State Police, Mr. Jim McMahon, for the state of New York, and offered any immediate assistance on the governor's behalf that he may need as they go about search and rescue and other affairs in that disaster. Our next conference call will be at 5:30 this afternoon, again with the state and local law enforcement counterparts around the state, and hopefully we'll have more to report then of business as usual. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you. Any questions?
Governor, to what extent do you think your father is going to weigh in on these discussions? Is with your brother? Your father's been through something like this before.
Well, my father hasn't been through something like this before. I think you have to go back to December 7th, 1941 for something this magnitude. Having said that, I'm sure that my brother will get excellent advice from a lot of places inside and outside of government, and I'm confident that our country will respond in a way that is proper for the greatest country on the face of the earth to respond. But right now, we're in the process of extending our hearts and the hand of friendship to our brothers and sisters that are suffering right now in the New York area as well as Washington, D.C., and we're preparing, as we are responsible to do, for anything that might happen in the short run here in Florida. Yeah.
Governor, could you take us through how you came to learn about what was going on today and at what time your decisions were made about closing the Capitol?
Well, I was with at least half of you at the cabinet meeting, which was outside the Capitol for the first time at the State Board of Administration building, and as information came in, I sought the advice of Commissioner Moore and my office, and we made the determination, spoke to President McKay, made the determination that, at least as it relates to Tallahassee, given the fact that we're the fourth largest state, the state capitol building, given its height and obvious prominence for our state, was a target for some type of attack, and we made the decision, I think it was the proper one, to evacuate the Capitol. After the cabinet meeting, I came here to the Emergency Operations Center, and we've been working with local law enforcement officials and others to make sure that the implementation of a contingency plan to prepare for further terrorist attacks, that we're prepared. And I believe that as best as we can be, that we are. Our seaports, our airports, the power plants, communications, water, all of these things, the people responsible for implementing plans for moments like this are implemented, I think Floridians can feel quite safe. Yeah.
Governor, you spoke to your dad this morning. Pardon me, what was the nature of that conversation?
Excuse me?
You spoke to your dad this morning?
Well, I was just worried about him. I wanted to see how he was doing. I've checked with my children and my wife and my mom and dad, and they're all doing fine.
Did your dad offer you advice in any way?
No, he just was, he was en route to give a speech in Minnesota, I believe, and was made it to Wisconsin where he was grounded, and I think that's where he still is. Like a lot of people across the country, until air service begins again, people are going to be stranded in wherever they were. I have no idea.
Were you able to speak to Governor Pataki and Mayor Giuliani?
No, I wasn't, but my chief of staff did speak to either the chief of staff of the state of New York or the deputy chief of staff, and I've sent a fax to both of them that just shortly went out.
Specifically, is there anything you're offering as far as people, personnel?
They will begin through their, this is, again, you look out here and you see this Emergency Operations Center. New York has one, maybe not of the same magnitude since we have more disasters, but I'm sure the city of New York and the state of New York has a very good Emergency Operations Center, and they will begin to identify needs after they make their assessment. And I just wanted the governor and the mayor to know that Florida wants to be in the front of the line to provide help. We've asked for help on many occasions for many different reasons, given the natural disasters that we have, and our friends from all around the country have come to our aid. And on something like this, I think it's important to show our friendship and solidarity with the suffering that they're going to go through.
What precautions was even the First Lady taking?
You spoken with the President?
No.
What precautions was even the First Lady taking as far as safety and protection?
Got the best protection in the country, in my opinion, with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. I feel very safe, and so does my wife.
Governor, I'm sorry if you've already answered this question, but how long are we at level 2? Is that what level of security we're at, or?
Level for the Emergency Operations Center, it's at level 2 status, but
How long could we continue to operate at this level?
Again, based on what we know now, and based on, unless there's a change in information that we've received, we're going back to business as usual tomorrow. Now, the level 2 status for this operations center may remain, but the Lieutenant Governor and I are going to show up at our office and go to work, and the President of the Florida Senate and the Speaker of the Florida House will be there, and schools will be open, universities will be open, community colleges will be open, and that's the right thing to do, to respond to acts of terrorism, of cowardice, by paralyzing ourselves would be the exact wrong thing. That's exactly what whoever did this would want us to do. And so we're going to go back to business, not in any kind of rash way. We're going to continue to keep our guard up, of course, as we should. In a free society, we need to protect our freedoms. This is the new form of violence against the United States of America, and we should be vigilant. But that doesn't mean we're not going to go back to work. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm going back to level 1 status and go back to work in my office.
The President Governor was with the President this morning when he found out what had happened. Can you describe what that was like?
Yes, I was with President Bush in Sarasota at Booker Elementary School, where he was finishing off a 2-day tour of some of Florida's educational facilities to discuss reading. It was obvious early on that there was a problem. We were made aware of the fact that there was a problem at the World Trade Center that involved an airplane which had collided with one of the 2 buildings originally. The President went about his business in a very professional and calm way, actually hearing from the students in first grade as they read to him until more information was gleaned. He then retired to a separate room where he was able to access all the information necessary. He asked me at that point if we would carry forward with the program after he paid his regrets to the students, the teachers, and the parents at Booker, which he did, called for a moment of silence in respect for any victims and for the United States in general, and then apologized for his hasty departure to see after the tragedy. We continued with the program, and I have to tell you that I have never been so shocked as an American, but I've never been so proud as an American to watch the President of the United States go about his business in the incredibly professional way that he did, mindful of those children and the teachers and the parents at Booker.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You've just heard from the governor, who says that the state of Florida, the government, is going to get back to business as usual tomorrow. That is his goal.
And the state is, however, still under a state of emergency as a precautionary measure, but all state offices open tomorrow, all state universities and community colleges open tomorrow. The governor did say that all state flags will be flying at half-mast, and he urged all Floridians who have a flag to fly it.
We're now going to go back to Dan Rather to continue the network coverage from New York.
To L.A. flights. One, an American Airlines flight, the other, a United flight. And then United Flight 93, originating in Newark, New Jersey, headed to San Francisco with 38 passengers and 7 crew. This is the plane that apparently went down in Somerset County in western Pennsylvania, about 80 miles from Pittsburgh. Those are the 4 planes that we know of that were hijacked today. 3 of them plunged by suicide people who commanded the hijacking operation into targets, 2 at the World Trade Center, 1 at the Pentagon. We go to Mika Brzezinski in downtown New York. Mika.
Well, Dan, behind the fire trucks and the smoke and all the confusion that is now 10 blocks behind me, right down the West Side Highway here, is a horrendous and unimaginable mystery. Who made it out alive? The trade towers have vanished, and in their place, an ominous, slow-moving plume of smoke. Evacuations were so quick from the scene, from schools and buildings and apartments. There was no cell phone service at all, added to the confusion, and there's so little information coming about it out of the scene about the injured and the dead that people are literally lining up on the West Side Highway waiting and watching. That is all they can do. Now, we know of terrorist acts throughout your reporting in other parts of the country, but it's safe to say most people here can barely deal with what happened right here in New York City. I'm joined by 2 guys here, Michael and Christopher, and they actually saw much of this disaster unfold before their eyes. First of all, Christopher, where were you?
I was in a nearby office building, several blocks away, in a conference room on the northwest corner of the building. So we unfortunately had a very clear, unobstructed view of both towers. About 20 of us in the building or so, colleagues actually, gathered on one of the floors, one of the high floors.
So you heard the first hit?
Yeah.
You gathered and saw?
At least I didn't see the first hit. So we kind of gathered in this room, and we're just kind of discussing the events, and just within a matter of minutes, we noticed, again, what appeared to be, in such a short period of time, what appeared to be a large commercial plane at a low altitude, high speed, just, going right into the second tower. And it collided with the tower, the plane disintegrated, the building shattered, basically, and just a ball of fire. And,
in the room, the people around you, was it silent?
It was, it's kind of hard. It's kind of really hard to, I believe so. Just complete and utter disbelief.
Christopher, tell us a little bit about the chaos in trying to literally get from where you were to where you are now. I understand you ran down 46 flights of stairs. Take it from there.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as we saw the second explosion, essentially, we just thought we're in, a 50, 60 floor building. We could be the next target. So we had no idea what was happening. You see 2 explosions like that, and everybody kind of just realized, wait, we're in danger too. And people just started, it wasn't chaos. It was just everybody was going as fast as they could down the stairs, and going down 46, 50 flights, it was pretty tough. We get outside, and then all of a sudden you see just this fireball coming out of the towers, and it was just a surreal experience.
Yeah, bedlam. And the blast, of course, Dan, as we know, there was 1, 2, and then 3 as the towers collapsed, and one security expert from inside the financial center said literally hundreds of people from beyond the police line were covered by the falling debris and the building itself. Dan.
Mika Brzezinski in downtown, lower Manhattan. President Bush, having started the day in Florida, made a short statement there calling this an apparent terrorist attack. Then he flew to Air Base in Shreveport, Louisiana, made another videotape statement there, somewhat longer in both statements, assuring Americans that their government was continuing to function and that those responsible for this would be found and be held accountable, and asking for the prayers and thoughts of families most directly affected by today's tragedies. Then the president flew on to Nebraska, to Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska, where he was last reported to be receiving, quote, a briefing on the situation. And at that particular Air Force Base in Nebraska are the DEFCOM planes, which are aircraft outfitted particularly to carry presidents aloft in catastrophic situations. Not to say that President Bush is going to go on a DEFCON plane. So far as we know, he plans to continue to fly on Air Force One. But where he will go, where he'll wind up, we do not know. He did not go back to Washington as he said he was going to do out of Florida. More about that as we go later on. Now we're approaching the half-hour mark. Every half hour, an hour, we try to recapitulate what we know, what we don't know, bring you up to date on the situation, and we'll do that in a very few moments. But let me point out a couple of things before doing that. First of all, New York hospitals continue to be absolutely inundated with the wounded from today's events in and around the World Trade Center. Some patients have been taken to outlying hospitals, suburban hospitals outside the city. There is a shortage of blood, as you would expect under these circumstances, and the American Red Cross is keeping open the facilities for blood donations in the city, in those areas of the city that are not affected by the explosions and fire and events in Lower Manhattan. So those blood donation centers are open. The FAA says that air traffic, which has been grounded in the country in an unprecedented act since early this morning, that tomorrow noon is the earliest the FAA intends to have air transport authorized again. Overseas flights headed for this country were ordered to either U-turn or to find landing places outside the United States. NATO was holding what was described as an emergency meeting, which was due to begin about a half hour ago. A senior official is expected to brief shortly at FBI headquarters in Washington. We will, of course, be monitoring that, probably carry it live for you. Also at the Pentagon, where there's been very little information about the extent of damage today, understandably little information. The Defense Department wanting to give out as few details as possible, but there has been damage at the Pentagon. There have been some fatalities there. The Defense Department confirmed that several hours ago, and some injured. But we'll also be receiving a Pentagon briefing somewhere along the line this afternoon. The pictures you're seeing now on videotape are from the World Trade Center area. Let me point out that it wasn't just the collapse of the twin towers of the World Trade Center, one tower and then the other, where 50,000 people generally work on any given workday and where thousands more generally visit, but there were buildings around the World Trade Center that in the avalanche of debris, the concrete and steel and other materials raining down the whole area, there were other buildings in that section of New York, Lower Manhattan, that collapsed at or about the same time as the World Trade Center. The mayor of New York, Mayor Rudolph Giuliani, has said that there's been a, quote, tremendous loss of life. In an interview with CBS News, he wouldn't even speculate as to how much loss of life. There, at last report, there were people known to be still alive in the debris of the World Trade Center collapse. Efforts were being organized to try to get to those people. Now, this is an unprecedented show of terrorist horror, what you're seeing today. The 110-story World Trade Center collapsed in this shower of rubble and dust and destruction after two hijacked airliners, the airliners carrying a lot of people themselves, slammed into the sides of the twin symbols of American capitalism. And Fuad Ajani from Johns Hopkins University pointing out before that the two main targets today, one a symbol of America's economic power, the World Trade Centers, the other the symbol of American military power with the Defense Department. And no one can believe that those two main targets were selected at random. They were selected for their symbolic importance to the nation. New York City Mayor Rudolph Giuliani said, and I quote him again, "Now the number of casualties will be more than most of us can bear." Now, this was a systematic terrorist attack that included another hijacked plane crashing into the Pentagon. And We very early on this morning said that this was the Pearl Harbor of terrorism. Then following that, at least one U.S. senator picked up on that theme, comparing this to the incidents of 1941's Japanese Pearl Harbor attack that launched World War II. This day, national security was quickly moved up all around the country. A terrorist directed the two planes into the towers in the middle of the morning rush hour. There was no coincidence at the hour they did it. It was right at the height of the rush hour, right at 9 o'clock. And you say, well, how did this happen? Well, we don't know, but apparently two planes bound from Boston to Los Angeles were hijacked almost simultaneously. Somebody had to go into the cockpit of the plane, somebody had to command the plane, and somebody said, in effect, I'm a suicide bomber, an airborne suicide bomber. And they crashed the planes into the World Trade Center. And much the same thing is believed to have happened with the crash into the Pentagon. Now, as for what happened in western Pennsylvania in the Pittsburgh area with the plane crashing there, the details are sketchy. And yes, we did report that the FBI believed that there had been a plane crashed at or near the Camp David presidential retreat in Maryland, but that has remained a vague, unconfirmed story throughout the day. What you're watching on your screen now, debris and people, yes, humans, coming down from the upper stories of the World Trade Center before those World Trade Center towers collapsed. Some of the World Trade Center's 50,000 workers were seen leaping from windows to their certain death. That included, in one case, according to eyewitnesses, that included a man and a woman holding hands as they leaped from the World Trade Center as the flames engulfed their floors. Some people jumped from as high as the 80th floor. This happened as the planes exploded into fireballs. Unimaginable, these things, but part of today's reality. Now, first reports had at least 600 people undergoing treatment at hospitals. Early reports said 150 of those were in critical condition. At least another 1,500 so-called walking wounded were taken to Liberty State Park in New Jersey for treatment. The mayor of New York, Rudolph Giuliani, says it may take 2 days before a final figure of the dead and injured becomes known. No one would be surprised if it didn't take longer than 2 days. Yes, there was a New York mayoral primary vote scheduled today in New York that was canceled. I don't have to repeat, but will, that the financial markets closed immediately. They'll have a conference call tonight to determine whether the financial markets will open tomorrow. Hospital officials have been preparing for the worst all day, and they've gotten the worst. The Bellevue Hospital medical director, Eric Mannheimer, called this, and I quote him, a catastrophe of unparalleled proportions. Now, speculation, and please mark the word, italicize the word speculation about the attack, rather quickly focused on terrorist fugitive Osama bin Laden, who was last reported in Afghanistan. Afghanistan's Taliban government, the radical fundamentalist Islamic government of Afghanistan, moved quickly in a public relations effort, understandable from their point of view, to say two things. One, that they deplored this. Two, that they had nothing to do with it. And three, this would surprise some people, the Taliban spokesman saying that Osama bin Laden had nothing to do with this. Exclamation point, pause. That's what they said. And again, we want to come back to nothing but speculation so far. And we pointed out before, and we will point out again, that there are high-level intelligence people in this country and around the world who believe the United States had made a mistake by always attributing almost every terrorist act to Osama bin Laden. There's a school of thought that says we've built him up much larger than he is. I'm not subscribing or not subscribing to that point of view, simply pointing out that there is a point of view, a belief that among some, that we've made too much of Osama bin Laden. But it's way too early to make any conclusions about that. It's just simply to note that speculation centers around Osama bin Laden, as it has in almost every other case of terrorism over the last 6 to 8 years. Although it's true that a lot of people in the United States never heard of Osama bin Laden before the explosions at the U.S. embassies in Eastern Africa in 1998 and the ensuing cruise missile attacks by the United States directed at targets in Sudan and Afghanistan. Before that, Osama bin Laden, he was known in intelligence circles and certainly known in the Middle East and around Afghanistan, but was not all that well known in the United States. A high-ranking federal law enforcement official has told our Washington Bureau that no one has been ruled out, but our initial feeling is that this is the work of bin Laden. That government official spoke only on the condition of anonymity. Chris Yates, a well-known aviation expert at Jane's in London, said, and I quote, "Only a small handful of terror groups could have pulled off this operation." And he says, and I quote him, "I would name at the top of the list Osama bin Laden." In Afghanistan, a spokesman for the Taliban rulers denied that bin Laden had any role. However, a London-based Arab newspaperman said that followers of bin Laden warned 3 weeks ago that they would carry out what he called, and I quote him, "a huge and unprecedented attack on U.S. interests." For whatever that may or may not be worth. President Bush ordered a full-scale investigation to what he called hunt down the folks who committed this act. That's a direct quote. Now, American Airlines initially said the trade center was hit by 2 of its planes, both hijacked, carrying a total of 156 people, but the airline later said that that was unconfirmed, and now we believe that one American Airlines plane hit one of the World Trade Centers, and then a United Airlines plane hit the other World Trade Center, is what the current belief is. Now, CBS News correspondent and 60 Minutes 2 correspondent Carol Marin is downtown and has a report. Karen? Carol?
As I'm making my way toward the Trade Center along the water line, thousands of people were walking towards me, streaming out, almost not talking, trying to get through on cell phones that didn't work. Some of them crying, all of them looking pretty agonized. All of a sudden, I heard a roar, and I saw one of the towers blow and then collapse and fill the horizon with smoke, and I yelled, "Oh my God!" And I saw from street level, as though it had exploded up, a giant rolling ball of flame, and the firefighters screamed, "Run!" And I turned to run, but I fell, and I felt someone scoop me up, tell me to throw my high heels off, and I was running in my stocking feet with him. And finally, as we ran and ran, he slammed me into a wall and covered my body with his. I could feel his heart beating against my backbone. And I think both of us were sure we were dead, because there was no way you could run fast enough, and there was no way to avoid it. But somehow we escaped the flame, which was immediately followed by a storm of debris. We were breathing, it felt like giant particles of plaster, and there was smoke, so that if you tried to put your hand out in front of you, you couldn't really see it. It was the thickest, most intense particle and smoke I've ever been in. And somewhere along the line, the firefighter handed me off to a New York police officer. The thing that struck me, though, was that I didn't see many wounded people in the street, which led me to believe, at least where I was by the Trade Center, they had never even gotten out of the building. I thought I was going to die. It is as close as I've ever come as a reporter to thinking I was going to die.
Carol Marin, who was downtown earlier this morning when this catastrophe hit. I mistakenly said she was down now, which is what I thought, but this was a replay of a videotape interview we did with Carol Marin earlier in the day. You know, it's impossible not to compare this coordinated air attack, this undeclared act of war, with the attack on Pearl Harbor almost 60 years ago, the Japanese sneak attack on Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. And it's just as clear as can be that December 7th, 1941 will be forever remembered as, in President Franklin Roosevelt's phrase, a day of infamy. But so too will now September 11th, 2001, go down in American history as a day of infamy. At this moment, you may want to recall that Pearl Harbor was a disaster that brought the United States of America together and propelled it to victory. A thought to ponder as we go through this afternoon. Now, around the world, there have been some expressions of solidarity with the United States. Tony Blair, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, made an eloquent short talk to that effect earlier in the day. Others among the United States allies in the world of freedom and democracy around the world have expressed similar sentiments. There have been some expressions of celebration. Palestinians on the West Bank were said to shoot their weapons in the air today in what was said to be a celebration. Now, what we're waiting on right now is a briefing at the U.S. Defense Department. A Pentagon briefing is expected to brief shortly, and as mentioned earlier, a senior official of the FBI is also expected to brief very shortly. Admiral Craig Quigley will be briefing at the Pentagon. Now, if you're saying to yourself, well, where is President Bush? The answer is we don't absolutely know. He was last reported to be at the air base in Nebraska, getting a briefing. He had gone there from Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana outside Shreveport. He had gone there from being in Florida earlier in the morning. And as we await the beginning of one of these briefings, you're looking at scenes. This is a live picture in Manhattan. Perhaps, I think the world's best-known skyline with the Empire State Building off to the mid-left in your screen with that high, looks like a stick, little known, that was supposed to be a dirigible landing place high atop the Empire State Building. That's what it was designed to be, but no dirigible was ever able to get in there. And in that place, the Empire State Building, one of the landmarks of our country, recognizable all over the world. This is what the skyline, the New York skyline, looks like today. The World Trade Center's gone, both of them. Yes, devastatingly gone, right to the ground. Both of them crumbled, each after having been hit separately by hijacked American airliners. And we may be able to show you what the New York City skyline looked like before today. You can imagine, as you've seen the postcard pictures, if not all of your life, for a long, long time. But both the World Trade Center buildings, which had become, they really had replaced the Empire State Building as the principal landmark of New York City, both of them are gone. The former foreign minister of Israel, Shimon Peres, is in Jerusalem. Thank you for being with us, Mr. Minister. I appreciate very much you're doing this. Do you think this terrorist attack on the United States is because of its close friendship with Israel?
An attack on the United States. Attack civilization and bring all of us back to the jungle. And I think we have to do whatever we can not to permit another war with terrible consequences to be spread over. May I say that each of us feel today like an American. Our heart is with the families, with the victims. It's full of pain. But we know the United States is a great and a strong country, and as you've won so many wars and suffered so many agonies, again, you and us and all of us will emerge stronger and more hopeful. I want to say that we have to draw consequences, all of us. We have had, or we are having armies against enemies that practically do not exist, but we have dangers without strategies and without armies. The most important consequence today is to develop a strategy against terror. It can happen every place, everywhere, and cause untold of damage and victims and blood and tears. And the time came for all of us to get ourselves organized. By the way, we send our own rescue team, which is already on the way to the United States. We shall do whatever we can to stand on the United States, which is leading the world, defending democracy, and enabling all of us to remain as a civilized community.
Shimon Peres, you know our country, my country, well. And you know that there are any number of people in the United States who believe these bombings today are a direct result of U.S. support for Israel over the years in the Middle East. To those people who say that, what say you?
Well, you know, there were other acts of terror that has nothing to do with Israel, including in the United States itself. Terror is a terrible way of destruction and killing. And you have all over the world acts of terrors that has nothing to do with Israel. Terror
Mr. Paris,
is a
if you'll
new
excuse me a
phenomenon.
moment, I know that you will understand this. I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but Karen Hughes, the principal assistant to President Bush, has begun to brief, and we'll pick her up in progress.
Evacuated for security reasons and to protect our workers. Your federal government continues to function effectively. We have a federal emergency response plan, and at President Bush's direction, we are implementing it. We began to implement it immediately after the first attack in New York this morning. We contacted American forces and embassies throughout the world and placed them on high alert. The United States Secret Service immediately secured the President, the Vice President, and the Speaker of the House, and they are all safe. They have also secured members of the National Security Team, the President's Cabinet, and senior staff. As you know, President Bush was in Sarasota, Florida when the first attack occurred this morning. Air Force One has now landed at Offutt Air Force Base in Omaha, Nebraska, and the President is in a secure location. He is in continuous communication with the Vice President and key members of his Cabinet and National Security Team. Vice President Cheney and our National Security Advisor, Condoleezza Rice, are in a secure facility at the White House. I have just come from there. The Secretary of Transportation and other members of our White House senior staff are gathered at a command center there, and we are coordinating with other branches of our federal government. The Secretary of Defense remains at the Pentagon, and the Secretary of State is en route back to Washington from his trip to South America. President Bush is conducting a meeting of the National Security Council as we speak. They are meeting President Bush from his location and other members from different locations in Washington and other locations. As many of you have been reporting, the Federal Aviation Administration ordered all airports closed, and all planes which were in the air were directed to land at the nearest airport. International flights were diverted to alternate locations outside of the United States. Transportation Secretary Mineta has directed the Federal Aviation Administration to suspend operations until at least noon tomorrow. So no airline flights will operate until at least then, and until the FAA announces that operations will be resumed. Secretary Mineta has also issued orders controlling the movement of all vessels in United States navigable waters. The Federal Emergency Management Agency has activated 8 urban search and rescue task forces in New York, and 4 of these highly trained teams are at work here in Washington at the Pentagon. Every federal agency has implemented continuity of operations plans to make sure the government continues to function effectively. While the markets closed today because of the situation in Manhattan, the United States financial system has continued to operate. Banks have been open all day. The Federal Reserve has operated regularly and continuously. The Department of Health and Human Services has mobilized medical personnel and supplies to provide help to local authorities who are working so diligently to respond and try to help the victims of these terrible attacks. President Bush has committed the full resources of our intelligence and law enforcement communities to identify and bring to swift justice those responsible for these despicable attacks. The Department of Justice is setting up a hotline for families who fear that their relatives may have been victims of one of these attacks, and we will be announcing that telephone number shortly. Our fellow citizens and our freedom came under attack today, and no one should doubt America's resolve. President Bush and all our country's leaders thank the many Americans who are helping with rescue and relief efforts. We ask our fellow Americans for your prayers for the victims, for their families, for the rescue workers, and for our country. Thank you all very much, and we will continue to update you as information is available and confirmed.
Karen Hughes, who many people believe is one of the two most influential advisors around President Bush, briefing at FBI headquarters in Washington. Karl Rove, another Texan, transplanted Texan, but Texan being the other widely believed second most important person around President Bush. Karl Rove is believed to be with President Bush. The president was last reported at the Air Force Base in Nebraska, being debriefed there after going first to an Air Force base outside Shreveport, Louisiana, where he made a videotape short talk to the nation. He'd gone there from Florida. When these events first began unfolding this morning, the president said in Florida he was going back to Washington. He did not do that. The official reason being that the Secret Service, among others, thought that they, under the circumstances, it would not be the most advisable thing for the president to go back to Washington. But what you see, if you look at the map, at least mentally, the president's gone from Florida to Shreveport, Louisiana, to the air base, Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska. Where he goes next is anybody's guess. But Karen Hughes just briefing at the FBI headquarters. Now, John Chester, a spokesman at the Pentagon, has a briefing underway there. Let's go to it live. Obviously having some audio difficulties there at the Pentagon. We'll bring you up to date on what they said there. What we know about the Pentagon already is that an apparent hijacked aircraft, again a commercial airliner, was crashed into the Pentagon, and actually into, we're told, a helipad right next to the Pentagon. There was damage to the Pentagon itself. Flames and smoke consumed a portion of the Pentagon for a while. Mark Wells, since the Pentagon opened in 1943, this is the first time it's actually come under a direct attack. Nothing even approaching this has ever happened at the Pentagon before. After a somewhat long delay, the Defense Department confirmed that there had been fatalities, how many we do not know, at the Pentagon, and we saw some of the injured being treated and then carried away earlier in the day. But we don't have a lot of information on what happened at the Pentagon just yet. Now, I'm told that we now have some audio from the briefing, so let's try again to go to the Defense Department and pick up on the briefing. John Chester.